Tonight we journey deep into the shadows of Texas highways, where the roads are long, the nights are silent, and the horrors waiting beyond the headlights are darker than you can imagine. These are not just stories. They are chilling roadside encounters, ghostly hitchhikers who disappear without a trace, phantom vehicles that vanish into thin air, and haunted stretches of asphalt where screams echo long after the accidents have ended. But before we begin, here's something you should know. Most viewers make one huge mistake. They leave without subscribing. And by doing so, they miss out on the creepiest, spine-tingling tales that only the bravest dare to hear. Don't be one of them.
Hit that subscribe button now. Because the road ahead is long, the night is endless, and the terrors waiting on these Texas highways are far from over. So tell me, where are you watching from?
And what time is it there? Drop it in the comments. Because out here the night belongs to the restless and the roadside is never truly empty. Now, buckle up because these are 20 dark and disturbing roadside horror stories in Texas. The rain had been coming down hard all evening, drumming on the windshield in a steady hypnotic rhythm. The kind that makes your eyelids heavy and your thoughts dull. Paul squinted through the blur of water and smeared wiper strokes, trying to make out the faded lines on the blacktop. He had been on I-10 for hours, heading east toward Beaumont. The radio nothing but static and old country songs breaking through in fits and starts. The interstate was half empty, just the occasional set of headlights rushing by, but he felt watched anyway, the way one does when the night outside is too black and the storm too insistent. He didn't see the detour sign until it was right in front of him. Neon yellow, glowing unnaturally bright against the rain, a tall arrow directing traffic to the right. The sign didn't look like the usual reflective metal panels mounted by road crews. This thing seemed self-lit, humming faintly as he passed, the kind of electric buzz you'd expect from a cheap motel sign. It pointed toward a dirt road that cut off into the trees, wet earth glistening in his headlights. Paul slowed instinctively, tires hissing on the slick asphalt. He hadn't heard anything about construction on this stretch of road, but maybe he had missed a notice. The storm had already flooded parts of the interstate back in Houston, so it wasn't impossible. He turned. The dirt road sloped gently downward, hemmed in by heavy pines that leaned too close, their branches scraping against each other in the wind. The rain seemed quieter here, muffled somehow, though it should have been hammering twice as hard on the narrow canopy. His headlights swept over the shoulder and caught the shape of a car sitting just off the path. It was an old Ford sedan, late 60s by the look of it. The paint bleached and flaking, the hood eaten with rust. The tires were flat, and the windshield was coated with grime, but the body was whole, as if someone had parked it and never come back. Paul slowed as he passed, glancing at the wheel. No one inside, a little further another one. This time a Dodge truck, 70s model. Its cab collapsed inward like something heavy had crushed it. Beyond that, a Buick, doors hanging open, upholstery chewed into moldy tatters. The sight of them made Paul's throat tighten. There were no tow tags, no orange stickers marking them for removal. Just dead vehicles abandoned in a neat sequence as though lined up deliberately along the road. His wipers squealed against the glass. The glow from the highway had disappeared behind him, swallowed by the trees. The road narrowed further, and though he kept glancing at the digital map on his dash, there was no sign of this detour anywhere. The blue GPS line still showed him on I-10, a strange, impossible overlap. His pulse ticked faster. He reached to turn down the radio, but the static rose on its own. A sharp hiss that filled the cabin until it felt like needles in his ears. He punched the power button and the radio died, screen blank. The rain stopped. He hadn't noticed when it faded, only that the windshield was suddenly clear and the silence heavy. He rolled down the window an inch. The night air smelled of iron and rot. Wet soil turned sour. Somewhere in the distance, water dripped steadily, but nothing else moved. No frogs, no crickets, not even the whisper of wind. He pressed the button and sealed himself back in, a flicker of panic crawling up his spine. The road curved and his headlights fell across something that froze his hands on the wheel. Ahead, a cluster of cars crowded both shoulders, dozens of them, stretching into the dark. They were all decades old, models he barely recognized, their shapes hulking and alien in the shadows. A station wagon with wood paneling leaned on its rims. A Cadillac sat half buried in weeds, chrome stripped away, and mixed among them were vehicles that looked much newer but equally ruined. A Toyota Camry coated in rust it shouldn't have had, A Chevy Suburban with its windows opaque from mildew. He slowed to a crawl, scanning each one. They looked wrong. Not just old but used up, as if time had chewed them to husks. His headlights bounced across open doors and shattered glass. He thought he saw movement in one rear window. Just a shape slipping back, but when he stared, there was nothing. His breath fogged the inside of the glass. He gripped the wheel tighter and pressed the gas. The dirt road had gone soft, sucking at his tires, slowing him even as the engine whined. He felt the steering fight against him, as though something underneath wanted to hold the car in place. He kept his foot steady, eyes fixed ahead, refusing to look at the lines of cars staring back with their hollow grills and eyeless headlights. Then he noticed the license plates. The beam from his headlights hit the rear of an Oldsmobile Cutlass, the plate barely visible through rust and dirt. He squinted, then caught the number. It was familiar. His heart stuttered as he realized why. The plate matched his mother's car, the one she had driven when he was a boy, the one she had crashed outside Dallas in 1988. He blinked, leaned forward, stared harder. The car was the same color too, pale green, a patch of primer on the back door exactly where she had dented it. He swerved around it, nearly clipping a wrecked pickup, and pressed harder on the accelerator. His chest hurt, every beat echoing in his ears. Up ahead, more plates flashed by, and though he tried not to look, his eyes snagged on them anyway. A Honda Civic, same as his college roommates. A minivan that looked exactly like his ex-wife's. Then one that made bile rise in his throat because it was his own. His car, same color, same dented bumper, sitting on the shoulder like it had been there for decades, rusted through and rotting. He looked from the ruined wreck to the dash in front of him, his trembling hands on the wheel, and felt the world tilt. The engine sputtered. He floored the gas, but the RPMs dropped, the headlights dimming. The dirt road narrowed to little more than a trail between walls of wrecks, cars stacked so close their mirrors brushed his. Shadows leaned out from the windows, faces pale and indistinct, watching. His headlights flickered again and went out, plunging everything into blackness. The car rolled to a stop. For a moment he sat there in silence, breath ragged, raincoat sticking to his skin. He reached for his phone, but the screen stayed dark, refusing to wake. Something tapped against the passenger window. Slow, deliberate. He turned, heart pounding, and saw a hand pressed to the glass. It was gray and waterlogged, the fingernails long and splintered. The hand slid downward with a squeal. Another joined it, then another. Shapes crowded against the windows, faces smeared pale against the glass. The locks on his doors clicked open one by one. He screamed, grabbing at them, trying to slam them down again, but his fingers felt numb and weak. The door handle rattled. The stench of rust and wet soil poured in as the door creaked wider. He caught a glimpse of the dirt road ahead, stretching on into endless dark lined with hundreds of cars, all waiting with their doors open, their seats empty, their engines long dead. When they pulled him out, he didn't fight anymore. The rain returned on I-10. Traffic rolled past without interruption. The highway smooth and clear. The glowing detour sign still stood at the shoulder, arrow bright, humming softly, pointing toward the dirt road that never showed up on any map. On Highway 90, the road seems to stretch on forever, flat and empty, a ribbon of asphalt running between scattered towns where the neon lights buzz like tired wasps in the night. The air outside is heavy with the smell of tar and mesquite, and the occasional streak of headlights vanishes into the dark like ghosts. Drivers who have been behind the wheel too long know the stretch well, know the faint pulse of signs promising cheap rooms, cold beer, air conditioning, and vacancy. The Neon Motel sits just east of Del Rio, squatting against the road like a half-forgotten relic, its paint sun-bleached and peeling, its sign glowing and flickering in uneven spurts. The V blinks twice, goes dark, comes back again as if struggling against death. Vacancy, it insists, even when the parking lot looks deserted and the office light glows dim yellow like a nicotine-stained bulb in a diseased socket. The first thing anyone notices walking in is the silence. No background hum of conversation, no TV behind the counter, no radio murmuring country tunes, just the still air of a building where sound doesn't quite belong. The clerk is always there, though nobody can remember his face clearly after leaving. He sits behind the counter with a stack of keys that hang from a pegboard, none of them marked with numbers. He asks no questions, just slides one forward and lets the guest pick it up. The keys are old brass, the edges worn smooth, the kind you'd expect to fit a heavy door with peeling paint. If a guest asks which room, the clerk just nods and tells them to try until one opens. Some swear they heard him mutter under his breath, something like, "You'll find your place," though the voice never quite matches the lips. The rooms all smell the same, a mix of cigarette smoke and something sweeter, something that rots beneath the surface like meat left too long in the sun. The carpets are stained, the lampshades crooked, and the wallpaper curls away from the plaster. There are burns in the sheets, strange scratches on the furniture, and in some rooms the mirrors seem to ripple when looked at too long. Yet tired drivers still collapse onto the beds, too worn down by the road to complain, too eager to close their eyes. That's when the scratching starts. At first it's faint, like nails against drywall, soft enough to be dismissed as rats or the settling of wood. It comes from the walls, behind the headboard, under the floorboards. It grows louder as the night deepens until it's clear it isn't rodents. The rhythm is deliberate, urgent, as if something trapped is clawing to get out. Some guests pound on the walls to silence it, only to hear the scratching pause, then resume with more intensity. Others leave the TV blaring to drown it out, but the static always seems to grow distorted, voices murmuring beneath the sound, words too garbled to understand. The unlucky ones swear they've heard whispers beneath the scratching, a dry hiss of words pressed through plaster. Their own names sometimes laughter, the kind that's too soft to be human. And then there are the footsteps, shuffling sounds in the hallway outside, though no one is there when the door is opened. Locals in Del Rio will tell you about the trucker who checked in back in '98, found days later in his room with his fingernails worn down to nothing, his hands bloodied from clawing at the walls. Or the family from Houston that vanished one summer night, their car still parked outside with the doors unlocked, the clerk insisting they'd never checked in at all. Police searched, found nothing but empty rooms. The stories are old, but they cling to the place like mildew, too consistent to be dismissed as rumor. One night, a man named Harlan stopped there after driving straight from San Antonio. He was middle-aged, hollow-eyed, a traveling insurance adjuster running from a crumbling marriage. The highway had him half hypnotized, and the sight of the neon sign made him pull over without thinking. The clerk slid him a key, the brass worn thin, and Harlan wandered down the corridor until one of the doors gave under his hand. Inside, the light was dim and yellow, the smell thick. He was too tired to care. He kicked off his boots, lay on the bed, and stared at the ceiling. The scratching started after midnight. Harlan sat up, listening. At first he thought it was in his head, some phantom noise his exhaustion conjured. But no, it came steady, deliberate, just behind the wall by the bed. He pressed his ear to the plaster and felt faint vibrations as if someone were dragging nails down the inside. His heart thumped. He grabbed the phone by the bed, but there was no dial tone. He set it back down, the cord sticky under his fingers. Then came the whisper, a breathy sound, low, right against the wall. Harlan couldn't make out the words, but he knew the cadence, the rhythm. Someone was speaking to him. His name came faintly through the plaster. He staggered back, knocking the lamp askew. His hands shook, his throat tight. He opened the door to the hallway, but the corridor stretched darker than he remembered, the overhead bulbs flickering like they were fighting to stay alive. He forced himself back inside and tried to ignore it, stuffing his ears with tissue. The scratching only grew louder, reverberating through his bones. Sleep never came. When the sun finally rose, he opened the door, desperate to leave, but the hallway was wrong. The wallpaper was darker, the carpet wet beneath his feet. Doors lined the corridor, all closed, none marked. He walked, tried one after another, but each key fit. Each room was the same. A bed, a lamp, a mirror that rippled faintly like water. Behind every wall, scratching. When they found his car weeks later, it was sitting in the lot, keys still in the ignition, driver's side door open. The motel stood empty, its sign flickering. Locals say the clerk didn't recognize the description when police asked, claimed no one by that name ever checked in. But those who drive Highway 90 at night swear they sometimes see a figure in one of the motel windows. A man staring out with hollow eyes, mouthing words no one can hear. The neon motel is still there, still buzzing against the darkness, still waiting. The sign always says vacancy, and sometimes if you roll down your window as you pass, you can hear faint scratching in the air, following you long after the glow of the sign has disappeared behind you. On On the hot nights of July, when the cicadas rasped like saws in the dry oaks, the bridge over Lake Travis became something you could not explain away with headlights or liquor. People called it a phantom traffic jam, but that word made it sound like a carnival attraction, like something you could laugh about the next morning over coffee. It wasn't. It was a line of cars, stretching back across the span like any other rush hour, except there wasn't supposed to be rush hour at midnight, and there wasn't supposed to be fogged glass on a 100-degree night. And there sure as hell weren't supposed to be handprints pressed against the inside of the windows when no one was sitting in those seats. I'd lived in Austin long enough to know the lake was full of things that shouldn't be there. People drown every summer, pulled under by currents that don't match the wind. Divers find cars at the bottom that nobody reported stolen. Sometimes the water recedes enough in drought that whole graveyards rise out of the mud. But the bridge was something different. I'd heard about it for years, late-night radio shows and drunks at bars spinning stories. But I never saw it myself until the summer my cousin David came to stay with me. He'd just gotten out of the army, all nerves and cigarettes, couldn't sit still more than 5 minutes. He heard the story from a guy at the gas station and decided we had to go see it for ourselves. I tried to laugh him off, but he had that restless energy that made you feel like if you didn't go along, he'd end up doing something worse. So we drove out there one night coasting west on 620, the hill country opening wide with cedar and limestone, the air smelling like dust and lake water. The bridge looked like any other, its steel rails buzzing faintly from the tires of passing cars, the water below black and wide. At first it seemed like nothing. Empty road, a couple of boats on the water flashing their lights. But then, maybe a half-mile up ahead, the brake lights started stacking, glowing red against the night. We slowed. The line stretched across the bridge, maybe 20 cars, all idling in perfect order. No one honked. No doors opened. Just brake lights, exhaust faint in the heat. David leaned forward, squinting. "Where's the driver?" he said, his voice too loud in the stillness. I looked and my stomach turned cold. Every window was fogged, smeared from the inside. You could make out the shape of palms, 5 fingers splayed, sliding down the glass, handprints, dozens of them overlapping, and no silhouettes behind them. David killed the engine. The sound of cicadas rushed in, deafening. He opened his door and I grabbed his arm, but he shook me off. "It's a prank," he said, though his voice cracked when he said it. He walked up to the nearest car, an old Ford truck. He cupped his hands to the glass, tried to see inside. "Empty," he whispered. He ran his fingers across the driver's side handle, then jerked his hand back like it was hot. "Wet," he said, but there hadn't been rain for 3 weeks. I sat frozen in my seat, my hand tight around the keys, ready to crank the engine. I wanted to get out of there, but something about the silence held me. None of the cars rattled, no engines ticked. It was like they weren't even real machines anymore, just shells. David circled the truck, then went on to the next car, a little sedan with peeling paint. He moved slower now, like he was wading into water. I kept watching the handprints. They didn't stay still. They moved, pressing harder, sliding like someone was desperate to get out, but there was no one inside. The hairs on my arms stood up. Then I noticed something worse. The handprints weren't all adult-sized. Some were small, too small, like children pressing their palms against the glass. I shouted his name. He turned, irritated, but before he could say anything, the truck door clicked. The handle lowered by itself. David staggered back, his eyes wide. The door opened halfway, slow and deliberate, and a smell rolled out across the bridge, damp and sour, like lake water that's been trapped in a dark place for too long. The truck's dome light flicked on. Nothing inside, but the handprints on the glass quivered like the surface of water, and new ones started to appear, pressing out, fresh and slick. David ran then. He sprinted back to the car, jumped in, slammed the door, his face pale with sweat. "Go," he said. I didn't argue. I fired the engine, spun the wheel, and pulled a U-turn across the empty lanes. In the mirror, the brake light still glowed, a red river stretching across the bridge. As we sped away, I thought I saw shapes moving between the cars, shadows that weren't cast by headlights. Long, thin shadows that bent wrong, sliding low and then rising tall. We didn't talk on the drive back. He smoked, his hands trembling, ash falling across his lap. When we got home, he wouldn't look at me. A week later, he was gone. Packed his duffel, left a note that said he had to keep moving, couldn't sleep in a place where he could still smell the lake in the air. I heard months later that he'd drowned off the coast in Corpus Christi. They said he went out at night alone and never came back. Sometimes late at night I drive past the bridge just to see if the lights are there. I never stop. I keep my eyes forward, but out of the corner of my vision I see the fogged windows, the smeared glass, the shapes pressing to get out. And I know if I ever stop, if I ever look too close, the handprints won't just be on the cars. They'll be on my windows too, slick and desperate, pressing from the inside where I can't escape. The first driver to report it was a trucker coming in from Odessa on Highway 191. He said it darted across the 2-lane around 3 in the morning, so tall that its ears cleared his hood ornament. He swore his rig thumped into something, but when he stopped to check, the only damage was strips of rubber peeled from his tires, curled like black tongues. Behind him in the sand were bloody prints, long and narrow, the hind legs leaving gouges as if something had dragged itself away into the desert. The cops chalked it up to fatigue and whiskey. But by the end of that week, 5 more travelers had similar stories. They weren't drunks, and some weren't even Texans. Families on vacation, salesmen, an old woman heading home from bingo. All of them described the same thing. A jackrabbit too big to be real, too fast to dodge, with eyes that glowed like wet road reflectors. Each car left crippled, their tires shredded as if by a strip of caltrops. And always those prints leading off into the dark sand. I had been back in Midland less than a year, working nights at the refinery. The kind of job that leaves your clothes reeking like kerosene even after you shower. My buddy Carl, who worked security out by the tank fields, was the first to tell me about it in person. He said he'd seen one on the fence line while driving his patrol route. Not in his headlights, but standing in the sodium glow of the refinery lamps. Its fur looked like a mottled rug, its ears torn at the tips like old leather. He said it didn't hop. It walked, slow, deliberate, as if it knew he was watching. When he flashed his high beams on it, it crouched down low, then bounded once, twice, and vanished over a mesquite ridge in a way no living rabbit should. I thought he was pulling my leg. Folks out here are full of stories about chupacabras, coyotes standing on 2 legs, black dogs that prowl the highways. It's part of the landscape, like rusting pump jacks and the smell of crude. But the thing was, Carl wasn't the kind to make things up. And when he came by my trailer that night after shift, I could tell he hadn't slept. He wouldn't even sit down. Kept pacing, scratching at his arm until it bled. He swore it had followed him home, that he'd seen its prints in the sand of his driveway. His wife wouldn't come back into the house until he burned sage around the porch. By late July, the whole town was whispering. Sheriff's office blamed packs of feral dogs tearing up tires, but no dog leaves prints like that. Kids were daring each other to go rabbit hunting with pellet guns out near the drainage canals. Then a boy named Luis never came home. He'd been riding dirt bikes with his cousin north of town, near a dry creek bed that smelled of sulfur. They found the cousin unconscious, head split open from a fall. His story didn't make sense. He said a rabbit ran out between them, bigger than his bike, eyes shining, teeth like broken glass. Said it lunged and knocked him over, then bounded off with Luis screaming, dragged into the brush by something that should have had no strength at all. Search parties went out for 3 days. The only thing they brought back were Luis's boots, chewed open at the toes with scraps of skin still caught in the eyelets. The town clamped down after that. Parents kept their kids inside. Highway patrol stepped up presence on 191. The sheriff called it hysteria, said coyotes had dragged the boy off, but people in Midland have seen coyotes all their lives. They know what a predator leaves behind. Coyotes don't leave prints the size of dinner plates. Coyotes don't shred Goodyear tires down to the belts in seconds. And coyotes don't come scratching at your trailer door at 2 in the morning. That happened to me 3 nights later. I woke to the sound of claws dragging along aluminum siding. Not scratching, but raking, steady as a broom. I froze in bed listening. Then the trailer rocked, like someone had leaned their weight against it. The smell that seeped in was coppery raw. I crept to the window and lifted the blind just enough to peek. What I saw in the moonlight didn't make sense. It was crouched low, but its back rose almost to the window frame. Too tall for any rabbit, too long in the spine. Its ears twitched like antennae, torn and scarred. Its eyes caught the light and burned red like taillights vanishing down the interstate. It sniffed the air, lips peeling back to show teeth. Not rodent teeth, but long and jagged like a saw. And the sound it made wasn't a growl or a squeal. It was a chittering, a clack of teeth like bone dice rattling in a cup. I ducked back, heart hammering, waiting for it to break the glass. Instead, the rocking stopped, and after a moment I heard heavy thumps fading away into the desert, each leaving the metallic echo of weight more than flesh should carry. At dawn, I stepped outside with a tire iron. The prints circled my trailer, each one filled with dark blood that had already dried to rust in the sun. My tires were ruined, shredded in strips, and leading off through the scrub, away from the road, was a trail of prints that sank deep as if something heavier than a man had passed. Carl never came back to work. They said he took off for Lubbock, but I don't believe it. His place was found with every door open, his fridge overturned, the floors smeared with what they called animal blood. His wife left town that same week. Wouldn't talk to anyone, just packed and drove. Now when I drive nights out on 191, I don't stop for anything. Not for flashing headlights, not for stranded cars. I keep my eyes forward and my speed steady. Because every so often I catch sight of movement on the edge of the high beams, tall ears twitching, keeping pace just outside the light. And when I glance at the asphalt in my rear view, I swear I see bloody prints spreading across the road, vanishing into the sand. Folks here don't talk about it anymore, but we all know better. Out in the oil fields, in the mesquite, along the highways, it's out there. The Jackrabbit King, and it's still hungry. The old highway cut through the scrubland like a scar, a black strip of asphalt stitched across the desert just north of the Mexican border. Locals called it La Carretera de los Gritos, the Road of Screams, though the maps still listed it under its official designation, State Highway 281. At midday it looked harmless enough, just another forgotten road where the sun beat down mercilessly on the cracked surface and the wind carried grit into your teeth. But at night, when the desert cooled and the heat radiating off the blacktop twisted into something alive, that's when people swore it began to breathe. Truckers told stories of headlights sweeping across pale, trembling hands pushing through the pavement, fingers clawing at the cracks before vanishing like smoke. Travelers swore the asphalt quaked under their tires, as if the road was shifting over something restless and buried deep below. There were whispers about voices rising with the desert wind, voices begging in Spanish for water, for air, for someone to open the earth and let them out. People in Laredo, Eagle Pass, and Del Rio all had their variations of the tale. The most common thread was that the road was cursed, paved directly over the bones of those who never made it across. Migrants fleeing the heat with empty canteens, nameless bodies left in the dust by coyotes or worse, victims of cartels whose corpses were dumped in shallow pits and sealed under layers of asphalt. When the state finally expanded the highway, the government denied such things, of course, but old-timers remembered when construction crews hit something soft and refused to speak of what they found. They remembered the state contractors who quit halfway through the project, muttering about nightmares and waking screams, and how those who stayed on wound up drinking themselves into early graves. One night in July, a man named Victor Salazar found himself driving that stretch of road. He was 48, a mechanic from San Antonio heading back from a job in Piedras Negras. He should have taken the interstate, but his cousin had warned him of a checkpoint, and Victor was carrying more than he should have in the trunk of his Buick. So he turned onto the old highway just past midnight. The yellow lines faded, nearly invisible in the dim glow of his headlights. He told himself the stories were bullshit, just border folklore cooked up to scare kids away from wandering the desert at night. But as the miles stretched on, the silence pressed heavy. The air through the open window was cooler now, but it carried a strange damp weight that didn't belong in that dry country. The Buick hummed steady under him, tires thumping over cracks in the road. He tried the radio, but static hissed across every frequency, broken now and then by what almost sounded like muffled voices, pleading syllables lost in the crackle. He shut it off quick and gripped the wheel tighter. Around 2 a.m, just past a mile marker eaten half away by rust, Victor's headlights washed across something in the road. At first he thought it was a dog, but as the beams sharpened, he saw the outline of a man on his knees, both hands pressed flat against the asphalt like he was praying to it. His head jerked up suddenly, eyes wide and glassy, mouth working soundlessly before a scream ripped through the night. Victor swerved hard, tires skidding across the shoulder gravel, and when he looked back in the mirror, the man was gone. Not running, not rolling into the ditch, just gone like he had never been there. His chest hammered, breath ragged. He tried to laugh it off, to call himself tired, maybe hallucinating after too much coffee and too many hours behind the wheel. But then came the sound, a low moan at first, deep and vibrating under the tires like the highway itself was groaning. The steering wheel quivered against his palms. The moan built into a chorus of voices, dozens layered over each other, ragged and wet, crying out in Spanish and English, begging for water, for mercy, for someone to stop the car. The Buick shuddered as if the pavement beneath it rippled, and Victor slammed his foot down harder, the engine roaring as the speedometer needle climbed. He didn't dare look down, but in his peripheral vision he saw the cracks in the asphalt splitting wider, saw pale shapes pushing through like worms through soil, arms, hands, shoulders writhing under the black surface. One pale hand smacked against his windshield with a fleshy thud, leaving behind a streak of blood before dissolving into nothing. The screams grew louder, filling the car, drowning out his own voice when he shouted. His headlights flickered, dimmed, and for a moment he swore he was driving not on pavement but across a sea of faces, mouths stretched wide in agony, eyes rolling back white. He thought of pulling over, of abandoning the Buick and running into the desert, but then he saw the ditch, the miles of thorn brush and cactus stretching on under the thin moonlight, and he knew instinctively it would be worse out there. Whatever lived under the road had spread, like roots under soil, and the desert itself was just an extension of its grave. Victor didn't remember passing out, but at dawn he woke, slumped over the wheel with the Buick idling on the shoulder. His throat was raw, his shirt soaked in sweat. When he pulled back onto the road, the voices were gone, the pavement calm, though his tires left behind streaks of something dark that wasn't oil. He drove the rest of the way in silence, swore he'd never speak of it, but his cousin said later he was never the same. He drank more, stopped sleeping, muttered to himself about hands clawing through the walls of his house, about whispers under the floorboards at night. Months later, his Buick was found abandoned near Cotulla, driver's door wide open, engine still running. No sign of Victor, though the asphalt beneath the car was split in long cracks, and if you stood real quiet by the edge, you could hear it. A whisper, faint but rising steady, calling from the depths. Dry tongues rasping against broken teeth, begging for just one mouthful of water before the road sealed them under again. And still the truckers drive it. Still the locals warn their children never to take that road after dark, because they know it isn't just a story. The desert doesn't forget its dead, and on La Carretera de los Gritos, the dead don't forget to scream. The canyon lay wide and black beneath the Texas night, a cut in the earth so deep it seemed bottomless when the moonlight failed. Truckers who took the long-haul routes past Palo Duro after midnight said the place was cursed, though most laughed off their own stories in daylight. It was just the dark playing tricks, they'd claim, or too much coffee making shadows jump. But every so often, a man would go quiet at the mention of it, eyes fixed on the floor, and you knew there was something he'd seen that he couldn't laugh away. The stretch of highway south of Amarillo was lonely country, with miles between lights and nothing but scrubland and wire fences along the shoulders. The canyon cut through it like a scar, and the road bent just enough to offer a view across the rim if you knew when to look. On certain nights when the air was dry and the wind carried sand across the asphalt, you could see the fires. Small at first, pinpricks of orange far below, too regular to be campfires, then more of them, a dozen or more glowing in a circle, and around them the moving shapes, figures, thin, dark, darting like insects around a lamp, dancing, and above them, the shadows cast against the canyon walls, racing higher than they had any right to, stretching hundreds of feet tall, moving faster than firelight should allow, faster than the figures themselves, like the shadows wanted to escape the bodies they were tied to. A man named Walker told me once what he saw there, and he swore every word was true. He had 20 years of hauling under his belt, no patience for ghost stories. But the night he told me, his hands shook around his glass. Said he was heading east with a load of produce trying to beat a storm, when the road cut him past Palo Duro. It was near 2 a.m, and the sky was moonless, just black stretched forever, his headlights carving tunnels through it. Then he caught it in the corner of his eye, that glow below. He slowed, thinking it was a brush fire, but when he rolled down his window, the smell wasn't right. No smoke, no burning cedar, nothing. Just a dry, sour air that reminded him of meat left out too long. He pulled to the shoulder and stepped out, and that was when he heard the sound. Not music exactly, but a rhythm. Voices pitched low, carrying up from the depths. Chants maybe, or something older than words. He looked down and saw the figures moving. Not in random steps, but in a pattern, a circle tight around the flames. And their shadows. God help him. Their shadows were climbing the cliffs like animals, stretching long arms toward the rim, clawing for a way out. He should have left then, but Walker was stubborn. Always had to see for himself. He grabbed his flashlight and walked to the edge of the overlook. Boots crunching gravel, heart hammering like he'd just run a mile. The chanting grew clearer, like it was in his ears now, though he couldn't make out a word. He leaned over, sweeping his light down, but the beam didn't touch them. It just seemed to get swallowed, like the darkness itself had teeth. The figures didn't stop, didn't falter, though some of the shadows seemed to notice him. He swore they slowed their climb, turned their faces, if you could call them that, toward where he stood. He dropped the light, scrambled back, and by the time he found the strength to run to his rig, the chanting was inside his head, pulsing with his heartbeat. He drove the rest of the night without stopping, didn't even check his mirrors. Walker said the dreams started the night after. Always the canyon, always the fires. Only now he was down there with them. The figures moved around him, their faces hidden under hoods or masks made of something pale and stretched like hides dried in the sun. Their voices droned in that same rhythm, and when he tried to cover his ears, he realized he didn't have hands anymore. Only shadows where his arms should be. The shadows would stretch and pull him along, up the walls of the canyon toward the rim, toward freedom. But always something dragged him back down, kept him in the circle. He'd wake up drenched in sweat, the sour smell of spoiled meat still in his nostrils. A month after he told me that story, Walker's truck was found abandoned on the shoulder near the canyon. Keys in the ignition, coffee still warm in the cab, but no sign of him. They searched the area for 3 days. Nothing, not a boot print, not a scrap of clothing. Some said he walked off to start fresh, but I knew better. I drove past Palo Duro not long after, and I looked down, though I swore I wouldn't. The fires were there. The figures moved, and for a moment, just one brief moment, I thought I saw him among them. A taller shape, shoulders hunched, moving in that same slow rhythm. His shadow climbing the cliff faster than the body could. Since then, I don't stop when I pass that stretch of road. I keep my eyes straight ahead, hands tight on the wheel, and I don't breathe until the canyon's behind me. But some nights, parked in a lot 100 miles away, I'll see the glow again, flickering in my mirrors, and I'll hear that chant rising in the silence, beating against my ribs, and I wonder how long before the shadows notice me too. The GPS dropped out right after the loop of South Broadway ended, and I realized I wasn't where I should have been. Tyler's streets are familiar to me, the main veins of traffic, the little arteries that feed into subdivisions and strip malls. The shortcuts only locals use, but this wasn't one of them. My phone screen froze with the map still showing me on the main road, but ahead of me was a narrow turn, a cul-de-sac that hadn't been there last week when I drove this way. It looked ordinary enough, asphalt still smelling faintly like tar, a circle of pavement surrounded by tall pines. Maybe it was new construction, I thought. Tyler was always sprouting houses, subdivisions rising out of what was farmland just months before. I figured it was some neighborhood in progress, so I eased the wheel and took the turn. The headlights rolled across the circle, gravel dust rising in pale arcs. I saw no houses, no streetlights, no construction equipment, only the faint outline of driveways that led nowhere, like scars in the dirt. I slowed to a stop at the end, flicked the shifter to reverse, and tried to back out. The wheels spun, the car groaned, but the motion felt wrong. The street behind me had vanished into the dark. My taillights shone against something that wasn't there before, a wall of trees packed tight together, their bark slick and wet-looking. I blinked hard and checked the rear-view mirror, but the entrance I'd just come through was gone. My chest tightened. Maybe I had turned too sharp, maybe I had missed the way back out. I inched forward again, circling the cul-de-sac slowly. The pavement looped endlessly. Every turn brought me back to the same dark center, a circle with no exit. That's when I heard it, a faint scrape outside the car like a shoe dragging across gravel. I killed the radio, though I don't remember ever having it on. The sound came again, closer this time, deliberate. Footsteps. I pressed the locks on the doors and they clicked down with mechanical finality. The sound circled, crunching softly, moving around me in a slow loop. My heart kicked faster with each pass and I felt the pressure of eyes pressing against the windows, though I could see nothing beyond the beams of my headlights. I rolled the window down just an inch, not sure why. Maybe to prove to myself there was nothing out there. The night air smelled strange, coppery, thick like blood left too long in a drain. The footsteps came again, heavier now, the gravel grinding with each step. The sound moved behind me, then to the side, then back in front, always circling, never stopping. I gripped the steering wheel until my knuckles whitened, staring straight ahead into the trees, waiting for something to emerge. Nothing did. Only the sound of footsteps pacing my car like a predator. I jammed the shifter into drive and hit the gas. The engine roared, tires squealed, but the car went nowhere. The speedometer needle climbed, though I felt no motion. I was stuck in place, as if the circle of asphalt had glued itself to the tires. The footsteps grew heavier, each circuit around me slower, more deliberate. I imagined something tall, broad, pressing its weight into each step, its presence growing thicker with every lap. I could feel it pressing on my chest, an invisible hand tightening against my ribs. My phone buzzed. I grabbed it like a lifeline, but the screen was dead, black and lifeless even though the battery had been near full. The reflection in the screen showed something behind me in the back seat, a shape darker than the shadows sitting perfectly still. I snapped my head around, but the seat was empty. When I turned back, the reflection was gone. The footsteps stopped. The silence was worse than the sound. I held my breath, waiting. Then came a single knock against the driver's side door. Not loud, not angry, just a hollow tap, as though testing the metal, checking its strength. Another knock followed, harder, then another, each one climbing louder, faster until it became pounding, fists hammering against the glass, shaking the frame. I screamed and slammed the horn, but it gave no sound. My own voice was swallowed by the dark. Then, as suddenly as it started, the pounding stopped. The circle was quiet again, except for my own ragged breath. I tried the ignition even though the car was still running. I twisted the key, desperate, but the engine didn't respond. The headlights flickered once, twice, then went out, plunging me into absolute darkness. The footsteps started again, so heavy now that the ground itself seemed to shake. I gripped the steering wheel and shut my eyes, whispering to myself that it wasn't real, that I would wake up, that Tyler's streets would be waiting for me just outside this nightmare. Something leaned against the hood of the car. I felt the weight settle, the front suspension dipping. Then the weight moved, sliding across the hood toward me. The air grew colder, my breath fogging up the inside of the windshield. A handprint appeared on the glass, pressed from the outside, fingers long and wrong, smearing slowly down until it disappeared into the dark. I couldn't see it, but I knew it was there, crouched low, waiting. The last thing I remember was a sound right at my ear, close enough that I felt its breath push the hair on my neck. A voice, low and gravelly, whispering a word I couldn't quite understand but knew in my bones. It wasn't English. It wasn't anything human. My vision blurred, the world tilted, and the darkness swallowed me whole. I woke up the next morning on the shoulder of Highway 69, just south of Tyler. My car was parked at an angle, engine dead, battery drained. The road behind me stretched empty and ordinary. No cul-de-sac, no new pavement, no trees where they shouldn't be. My phone was in my lap, the battery at 1%, the screen cracked straight down the middle. I started the car and it turned over like nothing had happened. I drove home without looking back. But that night, when I closed my eyes, I heard it again, faint at first, then louder. Footsteps circling my bed in the dark. It was just after 9 on a windless Thursday night when I first saw the white truck. I was driving north out of Waco, taking the back roads toward Hillsboro, cutting past the Brazos where the water smelled like rust and old catfish. The 2-lane blacktop was empty except for me, and the night pressed down heavy, no moon, no stars, just the glow of my headlights carving tunnels out of the dark. I'd been on the road a long while, windows cracked to let in the September air that still carried the last heat of the day. And I remember thinking how quiet everything felt, like the land itself was holding its breath. The truck showed up in my rearview mirror out of nowhere. One minute it was nothing but empty road, and the next there were high beams burning into the glass, flooding the inside of my car with blinding white. At first I thought it was just some impatient local, maybe drunk or itching to get home, so I sped up, let my tires hum faster over the asphalt. But no matter how quick I went, the truck stayed right on me, tight to my bumper. I could make out its shape in the mirror, a spotless white pickup, the kind you'd see on a dealership lot. No mud on the tires, no dents, not even a bug spattered on the grill. It was so close that I couldn't see the license plate, only the gleaming chrome and those pale lights that drilled into my eyes. I tapped my brakes, a little warning nudge. Most folks back off when you do that, but this one didn't. The truck lunged forward, a hair from kissing my bumper. My palms started sweating against the wheel. I told myself to keep steady, not to spook. Maybe it was some high school kid messing around, or maybe somebody from one of the little towns off Highway 6 who didn't care about spooking strangers. Either way, I wasn't about to let them run me off the road. After a mile or so, I slowed to a crawl. That's when it happened. The truck swung wide into the opposite lane and drifted past me. Easy as you please, engine humming like it had all the time in the world. And that's when I saw it. When my stomach went hollow and the hair on my arms stood up stiff. There was no driver, not a man, not a woman, not a shadow of anything human behind that wheel. Just a dog, a black and tan mutt, maybe a shepherd mix sitting upright in the driver's seat with its paws on the steering wheel like it was born to be there. Its tongue lolled out between its teeth, catching the glow of the dashboard lights, and for one sickening second, it turned its head toward me. The eyes caught my high beams and flashed yellow, wild and unblinking. I nearly ran off the shoulder. By the time I got control again, the truck was pulling ahead, smooth and steady, not weaving, not jerking like some animal was flopping around inside. It kept straight as an arrow, tail lights fading red into the night until it crested a hill and vanished. I should have turned around right then. Should have gone back to Waco, found a motel with flickering neon and slept off the site. But I didn't. I told myself I was tired, that my mind had played a trick on me, that the glare of the lights had warped what I'd seen. You don't want to believe something like that, not when the world is supposed to make sense, so I pressed on, deeper into the dark, convincing myself I'd imagined the whole damn thing. But the truck came back. It always came back. Over the next week, I started seeing it in places that made no sense. Driving home from work outside McGregor, I'd spot it idling at the far end of a cotton field, the white paint glowing under the sun, dog still sitting behind the wheel. Once I passed it parked outside a closed-down gas station near Elm Mott, doors locked, windows clean. But when I turned around to get a second look, it was gone. Nobody else ever seemed to notice. I asked a buddy who drove the same stretch of road if he'd seen a white pickup hanging around. And he just laughed, said half the trucks in Texas are white. And I was probably spooking myself. Then came the night it followed me all the way home. I lived in a trailer set back from the road on the edge of West, the kind of place with broken porch steps and a yard choked with weeds. I pulled into my drive and there it was, easing up behind me, lights burning. I killed my engine, sat there shaking while the truck idled. The dog's silhouette was clear against the glow of the dash, ears perked like it was listening. Then the engine revved once, sharp, and the truck rolled backward into the dark until the lights winked out. I sat on my porch with a rifle across my knees until sunrise, but nothing came back. I stopped sleeping after that. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that Mutt's teeth glinting in the light, saw those yellow eyes locked on mine. My chest ached with a pressure that wouldn't ease, and every squeal of tires out on the highway made me flinch. I even drove to the sheriff's office one afternoon. Tried to explain, but halfway through I realized how crazy I sounded. A ghost truck driven by a dog? They'd have run me straight out the door or worse, so I shut my mouth, muttered something about kids pulling pranks, and left. It was 2 weeks later, storm rolling in from the north, when it finally broke me. I was heading back from Temple, sky torn open with lightning, when the white truck came roaring out of the rain behind me. It was faster this time, furious, engine howling as it surged close enough to nudge me forward. I pushed my old Ford to the limit, tires slipping on the slick blacktop, wipers thrashing uselessly against the downpour. Every curve, every hill, that truck clung to me like a shadow, dog's face glowing in the flashes of lightning, tongue still hanging like it was laughing. When I hit the bridge over the Brazos, I lost it. My car fishtailed, clipped the guardrail, and spun sideways. In the blur of headlights and water, I saw the truck swing around me, horn blaring. For the first time, I heard it make a sound that didn't belong to any machine. A long, low growl, rolling up from inside the cab, rattling through the steel like thunder. Then it was gone, swallowed by the rain, leaving me stalled on the bridge with my heart hammering like it was trying to break free. I walked home that night, left my car where it sat, soaked to the bone, certain with every step that I'd hear that growl again. that those lights would bloom behind me out of the storm. I made it back, but I've never driven those roads again. I can't. Folks say the white truck still prowls the highways outside Waco, tailgating strangers until they're sick with fear, then sliding past to show them who's really holding the wheel. Some say it's the ghost of a rancher's dog that drowned in the river. Others that it's something worse, some devil taking joyrides through the Texas night. I don't care which. All I know is it's real. And if you see those lights swelling in your mirror, don't slow down, don't let it pass. Because once you see the dog behind the wheel, you'll never sleep right again. It sits on a stretch of road that barely anyone remembers anymore. A back route that used to connect Dallas to Denton before the newer highways were poured and lit and named. The road is cracked and faded, a ribbon of gray bleeding into weeds and mud, its shoulders eaten by brush that whispers when the wind is low. People say no one uses it, that GPS won't even acknowledge its existence anymore, but it's there if you know where to look. And if you're foolish enough to follow it at night, you'll find the toll booth. The little shack, painted once in cheerful red and white, now leans with rot and weather, its roof slouched like a drunk's hat, its windows clouded with the kind of grime that never truly clears. The arm of the gate is still functional, though, swinging down from its rusted hinge to block the lane, waiting for payment. You'd think it was abandoned if not for the man inside. He wears a uniform so old it looks dug up rather than washed. The cloth stiff with stains that might once have been grease or maybe blood. His hat sits crooked, a badge pinned to it that no longer shows a seal, just a warped brass disc. When you pull up, he leans out of the booth with a smile too wide, showing teeth that aren't right in number or shape, and hands that don't move like hands should. The fingers twitch and bend in ways that feel rehearsed but wrong, like a puppet strung by someone unfamiliar with anatomy. He'll take your coins without question. You can try bills, you can even try a card, but it's only change he'll accept. Quarters clinking into a tarnished metal box at his elbow. And when he nods and waves you through, that's when you'll hear it. Behind you on that empty road comes the sound of a crash. Tires shrieking, glass bursting, steel folding like paper. It's always the same. The sudden and violent percussion of two vehicles colliding just seconds behind your rear bumper. You'll slam your brakes, whip your head around and see nothing but the sagging brush and the stretch of road stretching endlessly back. No wreck, no headlights, no smoke, but you'll feel it low in your bones as though something terrible just happened a hair's breadth away from you.
If you wait too long, if you hesitate and linger near the toll booth, the attendant just watches, his eyes unblinking, his lips twitching like he's about to laugh.
People who linger don't always make it back. A friend of mine named Carl swore it happened to him back in the summer of '97. He'd been drinking at a bar just outside Dallas and thought to cut through the back road instead of taking the highway home. He said the booth was lit up with a yellow lamp, even though the road itself had been dark as a cave for miles. He rolled down his window, dug through his cup holder for change, and when he dropped the quarters into that box, the attendant's skin brushed his hand. He told me it was dry like parchment and colder than metal. He drove through, and that's when he heard it, the crash behind him. He stopped, thinking maybe someone had followed, maybe someone needed help, but the road was bare. Then he noticed the booth had disappeared from his rear view, just swallowed by black. He floored it, he said. And when he finally reached the lights of the main road, his gas tank was nearly dry, even though it had been half full when he turned down the forgotten stretch. Carl never drove that way again, and he told the story in bars until people stopped laughing. The strangest thing is, when you go looking for the toll booth in daylight, it isn't there. The cracked road winds on, sometimes cutting off entirely in patches of brush, but no booth, no shack, no gate. People who have gone in the daytime say it's just empty road. At night, though, especially on nights when the air smells of rain and the crickets go quiet, you can find it if you're unlucky enough. And if you're truly unlucky, the attendant will lean out a little farther than usual. His face just close enough that you can see the pores in his skin aren't pores at all, but tiny pits where something used to burrow. There was a woman named Sheila who vanished in 2003. Her car was found on the shoulder near that road, door hanging open, keys still in the ignition. No one ever found her body. Her sister swears Sheila used to talk about the toll booth, about the attendant's voice, how it rasped like dry leaves, how he always said the same thing when he waved her on. Drive safe. You never know what's behind you. That line became a sort of sick punchline among locals. But it isn't funny when you picture her standing there with the sound of a phantom crash chasing her down, the booth closing its mouth around her before she could reach the main road again. You'd think people would just stay away, but curiosity is a disease. And there are always kids with too much time, men with too much liquor, women with too much anger, who drive out there just to see if it's real. Sometimes they come back pale and shaking, coins still clutched in their palms because they couldn't make themselves hand them over. Other times their cars are found abandoned weeks later. Grass grown up around the tires, no sign of the driver. No one ever talks about what the tolls are for. Maybe it's a gate, not between counties or cities, but between places better left unnamed. Maybe the attendant isn't a man at all. Just something in borrowed skin that has forgotten how to mimic human hands. What I know is that if you pay, you always hear that crash. And one day, maybe soon, the crash won't be behind you. It'll be ahead, waiting in the dark. And this time there will be wreckage and there will be bodies. And you'll step out into the night to find the booth not behind you anymore, but ahead, its gate down, its light waiting. And the man inside smiling with too many teeth, holding out his hand for change that won't matter at all. Because by then, you'll already have paid. Highway 281 runs long and lonely through stretches of mesquite, oil rigs, and forgotten ranch houses. The kind of land where a man could vanish and nobody would notice until his bones turned white in the sun. Somewhere between Lampasas and San Saba sits a rest area that isn't on most maps. The sign says Rattlesnake Rest Area, white letters peeling against the brown metal, and it looks like the state stopped caring about it decades ago. The bathrooms smell like bleach and mildew. The vending machines hum with half their bulbs burned out, and the picnic tables lean in crooked angles like they've been sinking into the dirt for years. I was driving south that October evening, windows cracked to let the air flow through. The sky was bleeding orange into purple, and the shadows stretched long across the asphalt. I pulled off at Rattlesnake Rest Area because my bladder gave me no choice. The parking lot was almost empty except for a beat-up Ford Ranger sitting cockeyed by the trash bins. No one was inside it, no one in sight. I parked under a pecan tree where the pavement was cracked with weeds. At first it seemed normal enough. A cicada buzzed its last desperate song. A crow barked from the tree line and the air was still hot with the kind of dry heat that clings to you even after sunset. But when I stepped toward the picnic tables, I noticed something that stopped me cold. Around the base of each table, perfectly coiled in circles, were rattlesnakes. Not one or two, but dozens. Fat diamondbacks with dull, dusty scales, their tails tucked under them. Heads lifted just enough to show they were aware of me. Their eyes tracked me, but none of them hissed or rattled. They didn't strike. They just watched. I stood frozen, my mouth drying up, listening to the faint rustle of their bodies shifting against the dead grass. Every table was the same. Coils upon coils, silent and waiting, as if they had gathered for some purpose only snakes would know. I backed away slowly, eyes locked on them, and went into the bathroom figuring I'd get in and out quick. The fluorescent lights flickered overhead. The stalls were smeared with graffiti, names and phone numbers, old threats scratched into the metal doors. One phrase, written in red marker across the mirror, stood out. "Don't stay past dark." The pipes groaned when I flushed, and in that hollow space the sound was like a warning bell. I washed up quick, dried my hands on my jeans, and stepped back outside. The sun had dropped lower, a sliver of it left clinging to the horizon. And there they were, still coiled, still watching. Only now it seemed like there were more of them. I could see them spreading further, circling the trash cans, the vending machines, even edging along the parking lot. None of them rattled. None of them moved toward me. Just waiting. I jogged back to my car, unlocked it with fumbling hands, and threw myself inside. I started the engine, relief spilling over me when the headlights cut across the lot. But as the beams lit up the tables, I saw the snakes had raised their heads higher now, like cobras, their shadows stretching tall and unnatural against the pavement. I drove off fast, gravel spitting under my tires, and didn't look back until I hit the highway again. That should have been the end of it. Just a creepy story to tell later. Something to shake your head over with a nervous laugh. But 20 miles down the road, when the adrenaline had started to cool, I heard a sound in the trunk. A dry, dragging scrape, faint but clear over the hum of the tires. I turned off the radio, leaned forward, and listened. There it was again. A slow, slithering shift like something alive was moving around back there. I told myself it was nothing. Probably just a loose toolbox or the spare rolling in its compartment. But the longer I drove, the louder it seemed. A soft rattle joined it, not loud enough to be certain, but enough to make my scalp prickle. The steering wheel felt slick under my palms. I wanted to pull over, check, maybe even dump the trunk out on the side of the road. But the thought of opening it, of actually seeing what might be in there, froze me. I just kept driving, telling myself to wait until I hit a town. By the time I reached Lampasas, the sound had gone quiet. My nerves were shot, hands trembling as I pulled into a gas station. The neon light buzzed overhead, moths battering themselves against the plastic casing. I killed the engine and sat for a long moment, staring at the reflection of my own pale face in the glass. Then I forced myself out, walked around to the trunk, and slid the key into the lock. It opened smooth, no resistance, and inside everything looked normal. The spare tire, the jack, my duffel bag. No snakes, no sign of anything at all. I almost laughed with relief. Almost. Because when I leaned in to grab the bag, I smelled it. A heavy, musky odor, sharp and earthy, the smell of reptiles. The smell of a snake pit. I dropped the bag and slammed the trunk shut. I didn't sleep that night. Checked into a cheap motel off the highway, double-locked the door and lay awake listening. Every creak of the bed, every hiss of the AC unit, I thought I heard that faint rattle again. When I finally drifted off near dawn, my dreams were full of coils tightening around my chest, cold scales sliding across my throat. The next morning, I drove straight through to San Antonio without stopping. I thought maybe it was all in my head. Maybe the rest area had just gotten to me. But when I parked outside my apartment and popped the trunk again, the smell hit me even stronger. And on the inside of the lid, smeared faintly into the dust, were lines. Thin, curved lines that looked like trails where something had been moving, circling, coiling. I sold the car a week later. Didn't even care what I got for it. Bought another one and swore I'd never stop at some forgotten Texas rest area again. But sometimes when I'm driving at night with the window cracked, I swear I hear it again. That dry, shifting scrape just beneath the hum of the road. And I can't help but think about those snakes, silent and waiting, watching me drive away into the dark. The first time I heard about the voices was from an old fisherman down at the pier, a leathery man who smelled of diesel and salt. He told me that the bridge that ran from Galveston back to the mainland was haunted, cursed maybe, though he said it with a matter-of-fact tone that suggested he didn't much care whether I believed him. He said if you stopped your car on the causeway at midnight right in the middle where the water swelled dark and wide, you could hear them singing beneath the waves, not one or two but dozens, men and women, children even. The drowned, he said, calling you home. I laughed it off at first, like most people do when they're told a campfire story dressed up as local truth. But the way he looked at me, his eyes watery and stubborn, stuck with me. That and the way he added, almost as an afterthought, that if you heard your own name in the song, you had better not drive on. Better to open the door and let the tide take you quick before they found another way to collect you. Weeks passed, but the thought lingered. I drove that bridge often enough, working a job in Houston and living in Galveston for the cheaper rent. The causeway was nothing special during the day, just a stretch of concrete raised over the Gulf. Gulls wheeling above and tankers cutting slow lines through the water. At night it was lonelier, the lamps few and far between, the black water on either side catching the moonlight in restless fragments. I found myself glancing at the clock whenever I crossed it, wondering what it might be like to stop, to roll down the window and listen. Curiosity is a dangerous thing. One night after a late shift, I pulled onto the causeway around 11:45. The road was empty, as it often was at that hour. I drove slow, the hum of my tires and the thrum of the engine the only sounds. When I reached the center span, I pulled over onto the shoulder, killed the engine and let silence settle over me. The water below was invisible, a void that swallowed sound. I sat there tapping my fingers on the wheel, feeling suddenly foolish until I cracked the window. At first, nothing. Just the faint hiss of the breeze and the soft slosh of tide against the pylons. Then, so faint I thought it was my own blood rushing in my ears, came a hum. It was not one voice, but many, layered together in a wavering harmony that rose and fell like the tide itself. I froze, my breath shallow. It was singing, wordless and low, but unmistakably human. Dozens of voices, maybe more, weaving together in a melody that had no clear beginning or end. The sound seemed to come from beneath me, from the water itself. And it grew clearer the longer I sat. I should have driven off right then, but I didn't. Instead, I leaned closer to the open window, straining to hear. The voices shifted, separating slightly, becoming distinct. Some were deep and sonorous, others high and fragile, as though carried on the edge of drowning. And then I realized there were words, though they were blurred, slurred, as though sung through water. My skin prickled as I caught fragments. Pleas, laments, names, perhaps. I could almost swear I heard one voice rise above the others, calling out like a child lost at sea. That was enough. I jammed the key back into the ignition and twisted hard. The engine coughed to life, loud and ugly against the delicate song. But over the roar, I thought I heard something else, a sharper voice, clearer than the rest. It said my name, just once. Drawn out, mournful but unmistakable. I floored the gas and shot forward, my headlights cutting a tunnel through the darkness. My heart hammered as the voices faded, swallowed by the distance. By the time I reached the end of the causeway, sweat slicked my back and my hands shook on the wheel. I didn't stop until I was parked outside my apartment, engine still running, staring at the steering wheel as if it might move on its own. The next morning, I told myself it had been a trick of exhaustion. The wind against the bridge, the echo of distant boats. But when I returned to the pier a few days later, the old fisherman was waiting. He didn't speak right away, just studied my face as though he could read the truth there. Finally, he said, "You heard them, didn't you?" And when I didn't answer, he spat over the side of the dock and muttered, "Then they'll come for you. They always do once they've sung your name." I stopped driving the causeway at night. I'd make excuses to stay with friends in Houston, or leave early to avoid crossing it after dark. But sometimes when the wind blew in off the water, I could swear I still heard the faintest hum, carried across the miles. Once, lying in bed, I woke to what sounded like distant singing seeping through the thin apartment walls. I told myself it was neighbors, or a television, but deep down I knew. A month later, a coworker didn't show up for a shift. He lived on the island like me and took the same route home. The next day they found his car abandoned on the causeway, driver's side door hanging open, keys still in the ignition. No sign of him. The police wrote it up as suicide, but the fisherman just shook his head when I mentioned it. He said, "Another voice in the choir. It's been 6 months now. I haven't crossed the bridge since. I take the long way around, an hour out of my way just to avoid it. But the song hasn't left me. It creeps into my dreams, into the silence between waking moments. Sometimes when I wake at night, I hear it as clearly as I did on that bridge. Voices rising from beneath my floorboards, filling the room with their endless hymn. Last night I heard my name again, soft and close, as though whispered through water into my ear. And I think maybe the fisherman was right. Maybe they don't need the bridge after all. Maybe once you've stopped and listened, once they've sung your name, you belong to them. They'll sing to you until you answer. They'll sing until you come home. The tides are high tonight. I can hear them louder than ever, and they're waiting. I don't know how much longer I can resist." The first time I saw him was on a stretch of Highway 35, somewhere south of Waco, where the road bends against a line of skeletal mesquite trees and the fields run flat to the horizon. It was one of those nights when the air feels heavy, swollen with leftover heat from the day. The kind of night when the dark hums with cicadas and every mile marker seems to sink deeper into the black. I was alone, my truck's engine thumping beneath me, the radio coughing static between stations, and then my headlights rolled over him. A boy. Couldn't have been more than 12, maybe 13, wearing a crimson hoodie too big for his frame. The hood pulled low even though the air was thick and damp. His feet were bare, white against the gravel shoulder, and when he lifted his face as I passed, his eyes didn't follow the truck. They stared straight ahead, blank, as if he were walking in a dream. I should have kept driving. God knows I've told myself that 100 times since. But there was something in the way he moved, not frantic, not even desperate, just steady, like he had all the time in the world. Against every bit of common sense I had, I slowed, the gravel hissing under my tires. He didn't flag me down, didn't wave, just kept on walking. I stopped anyway, leaned over and pushed the passenger door open. He climbed in without a word. The smell hit me first, wet, not sweat, not dirt, but like pond water, thick and stale. He shut the door soft, like he'd been taught to be polite, and stared straight out the windshield. "You all right, kid?" I asked. He turned his head then, slow, his face pale in the dash glow. Freckles spattered across his nose. His lips barely moved when he spoke. "Have you seen my mom?" The way he said it, flat, not pleading, not scared, just a question. My stomach twisted. I asked where he thought she might be, if he'd gotten separated, if there was someplace he lived nearby. He only repeated it, softer this time, as if the air itself might answer if I didn't. "Have you seen my mom?" I told him no, but I'd help him find her. He didn't nod, didn't blink, just kept looking out the windshield, his breath fogging faintly against the glass, though the cab was warm. We drove like that for maybe 5 miles. I tried the radio, tried asking his name, but the static swallowed everything and he gave me nothing. Just silence and that smell of swamp water clinging to him. Then without a sound, I caught something in the rear view. A flash of red. My heart kicked hard against my ribs. He wasn't in the passenger seat anymore. My eyes shot left empty. But in the mirror, the back seat was full. Him. Slouched in the middle, hood pulled low, staring dead at me. My hands locked on the wheel. I whipped my head around, but the back seat was empty. When I faced the road again, the truck veered, tires screaming on the shoulder. I yanked it straight, breathing hard. I told myself it was my nerves, the dark playing tricks. But then I felt it, dampness soaking into my jeans. I glanced down. My seat was dry. It was the smell that gave it away first, stronger now, choking me. I reached back with one hand, touched the upholstery. Wet. I pulled my hand forward into the glow of the dash. My fingers glistened. Water. Cold. I looked again, and there they were. Clear as day, stamped into the fabric of the seat, bare. Wet footprints the shape of a child's heel and toes pressed deep into the cloth. I don't remember pulling over, don't remember killing the engine. I remember the silence when it cut off. The cicadas shrieking outside and the black road stretching in both directions. I threw the door open and stumbled out, sucking air like I'd been drowning. The truck loomed behind me, cab door open, the faint smell of algae wafting out. The highway was empty, no boy in sight. Just heat and dark and the sound of my own pulse pounding my ears. I left the door open, walked around to the back, half expecting to see him crouched in the bed. Nothing. When I climbed back in, the footprints were gone. The seat as dry as if it had never seen water. But the smell lingered. It followed me all the way to Austin. For weeks afterward, I scrubbed the upholstery, burned air fresheners, but it clung. Some nights I'd wake and swear I smelled it in the bedroom, thick and sour like a lake rotting in summer. I tried to forget, but the stories kept finding me. An old guy at a diner in San Marcos said he'd heard about a boy like that years back. Drowned in a stock pond when a storm swept through, his mom gone missing the same night. Some said she'd run. Some said she'd gone in after him. Some swore they'd both washed down into the creek and never come up. I told myself it was coincidence, just small town talk dressed up as ghost story. But then, one night heading south again, almost the same stretch of Highway 35, I saw him. Same crimson hoodie, same bare white feet padding along the shoulder. My headlights crawled up his back, and before I could even blink, his head turned, straight into the beams. Eyes hollow, mouth slack, water dripping from his chin. The smell hit the cab before he even stepped near. I didn't stop this time. I pressed the gas, eyes fixed on the road, telling myself it was a trick, a memory, anything but real. But as I passed, the cab grew cold, and from the rear view I saw it again. Red hood in the back seat, face pale and dripping, lips barely moving. "Have you seen my mom?" I swerved hard, the horn blaring from some 18-wheeler I'd almost sideswiped. By the time I steadied the truck, the back seat was empty. My chest was heaving, my hands slick against the wheel. The smell had grown stronger, gagging me, until I rolled down the window and let the wind tear at it. But the footprints came back. Darker this time, pressed deep into the fabric, water dripping off the edge of the seat onto the floor mat. I can't drive that road anymore. I take the long way, even if it costs me hours. But sometimes, even on other highways, when the night is thick and the radio can't find a station, I'll catch it. The faint smell of pond water rising in the cab, creeping out of the vents, and I know before I even look that if I glance in the mirror, I'll see that crimson hood and hear the whisper. And I know one day, maybe when I'm too tired or too slow, I'll turn around and he won't be in the back seat anymore. He'll be right beside me. Would you like me to expand this further into a full 15,000-plus character novella, weaving in more Texas roadside lore, side encounters, and a deeper unraveling of the boy's drowned past? That way it'll read like a true King-style long-form horror, instead of just a tight novella-length story. The station sat half a mile off the highway, not far from Odessa, but far enough that it felt like its own forgotten outpost. The paint on the cinder block walls had peeled to gray, the once bright Coke sign above the door bleached by the desert sun, until the red was nothing more than a memory. Only one set of pumps stood in front, their metal skins dented and scarred, their displays so sun-faded that the numbers glowed faintly only when the switch was thrown inside. If you drove by at night, you might think the place was shut down, the kind of ruin people pulled into for shade and silence, but it wasn't. The owner, A wiry man in his 60s with a bad back and an older smile still ran it, and the pumps, they still worked, at least in the technical sense. But the people who lived in town, the ones who grew up with the station just sitting there year after year, didn't use them. They'd rather run themselves dry on the road than risk filling up at that place. Because the pumps didn't sound right when they worked. They wheezed. They groaned and drew each gallon like it hurt. They filled your ears with the sound of something breathing, something that didn't want to stop once it had hold of you. Most travelers passing through ignored the stories. They figured the locals were superstitious, small-town gossips with nothing better to do. But now and then a stranger would learn. Sometimes they'd figure it out fast, yanking their hand back the moment the hose seemed to flex against their grip. Other times the lesson came slower and rougher. That's how it was for Mark Delaney, a trucker from Dallas hauling freight west. He wasn't supposed to be in Odessa that night, but his rig had been acting up all day. And by the time he spotted the lonely glow of the station's fluorescent sign, he had no choice but to pull off. The station lights buzzed like angry insects. The desert air pressed heavy on his shoulders, the smell of dust and gasoline mixing in a way that made him swallow hard. The pump stood in 2 crooked rows, though only one pair was still active. He pulled his truck in front, killed the engine, and stepped out, rolling his shoulders. The desert was quiet, too quiet. No highway hum, no coyotes, just the wind scraping sand against concrete. He fished for his wallet and slid his card through the battered reader. The screen flickered, then steadied. So far, so good. He popped the cap and reached for the handle. The grip was warm, too warm for metal that had been sitting under the coolness of night for hours. He frowned and gave it a tug. It came free, but the moment his fingers closed fully around the black rubber, he felt something under it shift. Not much, just enough that it wasn't the hard, predictable resistance of a hose, but something looser, more organic. He thought of muscle beneath skin. He almost let go right then, but the hiss of fuel starting up inside the pump distracted him, and he told himself it was nothing but wear, old machinery groaning against time. The nozzle slid into the tank and the pump began to breathe. That was the only word for it. Not the rhythmic clicking of fuel pushing through pipes, not the rattle of valves, but inhalations deep and slow, followed by long exhalations. The hose flexed in his hand as if it were pulling in air. He leaned back, trying to put distance between himself and the thing. But the nozzle was lodged firm in the truck's tank, tighter than any he'd used before. He tugged once, twice, but the hose jerked, subtle but unmistakable, like the twitch of a limb. He froze, his heart climbing into his throat. The station lights buzzed louder, almost drowning out the sound of the pump's breathing, but not quite. The air coming from the nozzle hole was warmer than it should have been, carrying with it a faint sour odor that didn't belong to gasoline at all. It reminded him of an animal's breath, damp and rotten, the way a kennel might smell after weeks without cleaning. He tried to tell himself he was tired. That long miles and bad sleep had made his nerves twitchy, but then the hose moved again, curling slightly, tightening against his palm. "Come on now," he muttered, yanking harder, but the more he pulled, the firmer it gripped. The rubber felt soft under his fingers, almost pliant. He dropped his wallet without realizing, both hands now on the handle, fighting against something that wasn't meant to be fought. The numbers on the pump display ticked up, gallons spilling into his tank, but he wasn't thinking about fuel anymore. He was thinking about the sound of lungs, about how the inhalations were coming quicker now, ragged, excited, and how the hose seemed to pulse with each one. Inside the station, a light flicked on. Mark turned his head, relief surging through him at the thought of another human being, but the figure in the window didn't move to help. The old man stood still, his face lit faintly from below by the glow of a desk lamp, his hands resting on the counter. He just watched. Mark shouted, his voice cracking, but the man didn't so much as blink. The pump wheezed louder, and the handle tightened until Mark thought his knuckles would split. Pain shot up his wrist. He tried to pry his fingers open, but they wouldn't listen. They were clamped around the handle as if welded there. He wasn't holding the pump anymore. The pump was holding him. The breathing quickened. The hose bent against his arm, climbing up inch by inch, slithering with a strength he couldn't fight. He screamed, tried to wrench back, but the nozzle was sunk deep, not into the truck but into something else, something that hummed below the surface. He felt the warmth of it bleeding through the metal, a heartbeat in sync with his own. It was feeding, but not on fuel. He felt it pulling at him, draining, and the longer it breathed, the weaker his legs became. The light in the station went out, plunging the windows into darkness. He called again, but his voice was thin, fluttering. The desert air was heavy, pressing, as if the night itself leaned down to smother him. The hose coiled tighter, ribs in the rubber flexing like the muscles of a snake, and he knew then that the stories were true, that the pumps weren't machines at all, not anymore. Something had taken root in them, something that breathed and fed and waited for the unlucky, something that needed more than gasoline to keep alive. The pump display blinked, the numbers spinning faster, faster. Gallons gushing, though he hadn't approved that much, though his card shouldn't have cleared it. The hose pulsed and he felt the strength go out of his arm. His vision swam. He staggered against the truck, trying one last time to rip free. But the nozzle gave a final jerk and he went still. His body sagged, lifeless, the pump's ragged inhalations filling the silence. And then slowly it exhaled, the sound long and satisfied, the way a predator might sigh after finishing a kill. By morning, the truck sat alone, engine cold, tank full. The pump hung loose, the handle lying neatly in its holster. The hose slack and still. Mark Delaney was gone. The clerk inside had already turned the sign to open, as if nothing had happened. And when another car rolled in that afternoon, a sedan packed with a family heading west, the man behind the counter smiled the same weary smile and nodded toward the pumps, telling them to fill up if they liked, though most folks around here didn't. Not anymore. The first time I drove FM 666, I was 17 and half drunk off a bottle of Jim Beam stolen from my uncle's cabinet. It was a 2-lane blacktop that stretched across scrub country west of Corpus Christi, a nothing road that ran between ranch fences and lonely oil pumps nodding in the moonlight. The locals called it Devil's Mile, though it was a hell of a lot longer than a mile. The name came from the markers. They counted down no matter which way you started, and when you hit the 666, something strange happened. Folks in the towns that framed the highway said if you kept driving past that sign, you'd loop forever. Gas would stick on empty. The world would smear into itself and you'd never come back the same. Some didn't come back at all. I didn't believe a word of it. My buddies sure didn't. That night, with the bottle in my lap and the windows down, we decided we'd go test the road. 4 of us crammed into my old Ford LTD, laughing at our own daring. The air smelled like hot mesquite and burned rubber from the highway, the kind of Texas smell you don't forget. My buddy Ray kept hanging out the window, hollering at the cows in the dark fields, and Tanya, the only girl with us, smoked cigarettes one after another, flicking them into the weeds. We weren't scared, not yet, not until the markers started to feel wrong. It's subtle the first time you notice it. The posts are ordinary metal things, white paint flaking off, black numbers stamped down the side, but you pass one and it says 9, then the next says 8, then 7. And before long you realize it doesn't matter which way the car is pointed, the numbers are always ticking down. Tanya sobered up first. She leaned forward between the seats, her hair in my face, pointing. You see that? You see what it says? Sure enough, the numbers were skipping faster than they should, each one a little closer to that cursed 666. By the time we hit the marker, the night had gone too still. No insects, no cicadas, just the hum of the Ford's engine and our own breathing. The marker was crooked in the ditch. The paint chipped, but the numbers sharp, almost freshly cut. Seskimogs. Ray told me to punch it, so I did, pressing the pedal until the speedometer needle trembled. The road curved, dipped, and when we straightened again, the marker was there a second time, leaning the same way, numbers the same. I laughed at first, said maybe we'd gone in a circle without realizing. But Tanya was shaking her head hard, her lips moving in silent prayer. We hadn't turned. We hadn't curved around near enough to come back. Yet there it was again. We kept driving. The gas needle froze on E. The car should have coughed and died, but it kept running. Mile after mile, the same stretch of mesquite and blacktop. The same crooked fence posts. The same moon stuck in one corner of the windshield like a spotlight. Each time the marker came, Ray got quieter. Tanya started crying, soft and low. My other buddy, Pete, just stared out the window, knuckles white on the door handle. Then we saw headlights up ahead. A pair of them glowing pale yellow, swaying like some old truck was rolling slow down the lane. I flashed my brights, but they didn't answer. We pulled closer and closer until I could see it wasn't a truck at all. It was a car like mine, dented hood, broken taillight, 4 kids inside. They looked exactly like us. We swerved hard into the ditch, the headlights vanished, and the road was empty again. No skid marks, no dust, just us. Pete whispered that he wanted to go home. Nobody laughed. We turned around. I don't know how many times we drove past that marker again. Time stretched, folded. Tanya said she saw faces in the weeds crawling toward the shoulder, mouths working but no sound coming out. Ray swore he saw his dead dad leaning against the fence, cigarette glowing, just watching him. I only remember the silence, so heavy it pressed on my chest like a weight. Eventually the marker was gone, just gone. The road spit us out near Mathis, the Ford running on fumes but still alive. We didn't talk the whole way home. Years passed. Pete moved to Houston. Tanya married a welder. Ray drank himself into the grave by 25. I tried not to think about that night. But sometimes driving back roads at dusk, I'd catch a glimpse of a white post with black numbers, always counting down. Sometimes I'd swear I heard tires behind me. That swaying glow of pale yellow headlights just out of reach. A few months back, a kid from town disappeared. They said he was last seen cruising out past FM 666 with his friends, laughing, daring each other like we once did. They never found the car. They say the boy's mama still gets phone calls late at night. Her son's voice on the line, whispering that he can't find the way home, that he keeps passing the same marker again and again. I don't drive that road anymore, but every now and then, when the night's quiet and the air smells like mesquite smoke, I wake up to the sound of tires on gravel outside my house. I look out the window and there's nothing there. Just the long, empty highway stretching out into the dark, and somewhere far away a pair of yellow lights drifting closer, waiting for me to take the wheel again. The first time James Hernandez saw the coach, it was late October, just after dusk. He was driving west on Loop 1604, the fading light pooling purple over the mesquite and live oak, headlights blinking on as the long arc of highway wrapped around the north side of San Antonio. His wife was asleep in the passenger seat, and their little boy was dozing in the back, lulled by the steady hum of the tires. James was tired too, tired enough that he caught himself blinking too long at the road signs, the kind of exhaustion that blurs the world and makes it harder to tell the real from the imagined. That was why, when he first saw it pacing his truck on the access road, he thought it was some kind of parade prop or maybe a movie shoot. The coach was black, lacquered wood that gleamed even in the dim light, pulled by 4 horses that ran with impossible speed, their flanks lathered, their eyes rolling white in terror. The coach's wheels sparked against the asphalt, bright orange flares kicking out with each turn. And inside, behind glass smeared with grime, faces pressed against the windows. They weren't blank or calm, the way you'd expect from some elaborate Halloween display. They were alive. Their mouths were open in screams he could almost hear through the roar of traffic, hands slapping and clawing against the panes, until blood smeared in streaks across the glass. The sight of it jolted James awake with an electric clarity. He swerved slightly, his wife stirred, muttered, and settled back down. When he looked again, the coach was gone. The next day, he told a coworker about it, laughing it off as a roadside hallucination. The man didn't laugh back. "You saw it," he said instead in a low voice. "The coach road. My uncle swore he saw it out near Leon Springs in the 80s. People say it runs from Old Comanche Trace all the way past Castroville. Always at night. Always right before somebody ends up dead." James asked what he meant, but the coworker wouldn't elaborate, only crossing himself before turning away. Weeks passed, and James forgot until it came again. This time he was alone, heading home late from a delivery run. The highway was nearly empty, the yellow glow of sodium lamps bending downward onto the asphalt. His radio was dead, the silence inside the cab deep enough to make him notice every sound his truck made, the occasional rattle of a loose tool in the back, the ticking of the engine as it labored. When the smell came, it was so sudden it made him gag, a heavy stink of sweat, leather, and something metallic like rust mixed with old pennies. He rolled down the window, and that was when he heard them. Screams, faint but rising over the roar of hooves that had no business on a Texas highway in 2023. The coach appeared in the corner of his headlights, barreling alongside him, horses slick with blood this time, their hooves striking sparks that fell onto the asphalt like a shower of burning rain. The faces inside were twisted in agony, mouths stretched, eyes bulging as if they'd been screaming for years. He recognized one of them. It was his coworker, the same man who had whispered about the coach road, his face pale and desperate, his fists slamming against the glass. James jerked the wheel and nearly spun out before the truck slammed back into its lane. The coach was gone. He pulled off at the next gas station, heart hammering, sweat soaking through his shirt. He tried calling his coworker. No answer. The next morning, the man was found dead in his apartment, sitting upright in a chair, eyes wide open, as though he had seen something so terrible his heart had given out. The police said heart attack. James knew better. The more he asked, the more stories he uncovered. A retired DPS officer told him about seeing the coach near Medina Lake back in '91, how it had run silently alongside his cruiser, the passengers hammering at the windows, mouthing words he couldn't hear. A woman in Floresville said her father saw it in the '70s, and 3 days later he was crushed under a tractor on their farm. They all agreed on two things. You never hear the coach until it's too close, and once you see it twice, you're marked. The third time it comes for you. James didn't sleep much after that. He drove slower, stuck to daylight routes when he could, avoided the quiet stretches of highway where the live oaks hung low over the lanes like skeletal arms. But San Antonio is a city of roads, of highways spiraling out into the hill country like veins, and eventually the night shift came again, and with it the emptiness of asphalt and the lure of the dark. He tried blasting music, tried keeping the windows open to let in the cold night air, but nothing stopped the inevitable. It was near Lytle, past midnight, when the stench filled his truck again. He knew better than to look, but the human brain is weak against horror. He turned his head and saw it. The coach was closer this time. So close he could see the wood splintering where fists had battered it for years. The brass trimmed green with corrosion, the horse's flesh tearing open with every stride yet somehow holding together. The faces inside were clearer too, and among them he saw his co-worker, the old DPS officer, the Floresville farmer, and others whose names he didn't know but whose eyes pleaded for the same thing: release. They screamed with a desperation so raw it stripped something inside him. One of them was his mother. She had been dead for 5 years, but there she was, her hands bloody from pounding, her eyes wild with terror. When she saw him, her mouth formed his name. The sound impossibly carried through the glass, thin and sharp as broken metal. James. He slammed the brakes, but the coach didn't stop. It veered in front of him, sparks flying as the wheels locked into the rhythm of his tires, forcing him onto a parallel road he hadn't even noticed, an old cracked strip of pavement overgrown with weeds and choked with dust. His truck shuddered, coughing smoke, yet the headlights still lit the road ahead and the coach barreled forward, always just ahead, never slowing. The faces inside screamed and clawed until the glass shattered, their hands reaching out, and the night filled with a sound that wasn't quite human anymore. Some say they found his truck the next morning, abandoned in a dry creek bed near Devine, the driver's door hanging open, the engine still running. James was gone. There were skid marks on the asphalt leading nowhere, as if the truck had driven off the surface of the earth itself. Folks around San Antonio whisper about it now, about how the coach road claims new souls every generation, how the passengers never stop screaming because they never stop burning, locked in that endless ride, sometimes late at night. When the air is still and the smell of iron creeps into your nose, you might hear the roar of hooves, see the sparks shower across the highway, and if you look too long, if you recognize one of those faces, then you've already taken your first ride, and you won't survive the third. Highway 6 ran straight as a rifle barrel through the low Texas countryside, a road that seemed to stretch on forever with only mesquite, barbed wire, and the occasional rusting windmill to mark the miles. It was a road meant for long-haul truckers and desperate travelers, the kind of place where you could go 50 miles without seeing another pair of headlights. And at night the silence pressed in as heavy as a grave. The first time I saw the convoy, I thought I was just tired, maybe seeing tricks in the dark. But the smell was what told me it was real. Lilies, strong and sweet, like a funeral parlor in August, and under it the sour stink of rot. I was rolling down the 2-lane stretch just past Navasota, heading south toward Hempstead, when the hearses appeared behind me. Old machines, long and low, paint dulled like tarnished silver under the moon. Windows tinted so dark I couldn't see a face behind them. There were 5, maybe 6, gliding up on me without a sound, no headlights at all, until the lead one suddenly flared its high beams, blinding me. They passed one after another, engines whispering and the air filled with the mixed perfume of death and flowers. My stomach lurched. Then, just as quick, they swung around the next bend and vanished. When I reached the curve seconds later, there was nothing. No taillights, no tire marks, just empty blacktop stretching out in both directions. I told myself it was fatigue, the kind of hallucination that comes when you've been driving too long with only the radio for company. I pulled over at the first gas station I found, bought a cup of coffee that tasted like scorched dirt, and kept my eyes on the cashier's back as he stocked shelves. I wanted to ask him if he'd ever seen it, the convoy, but the words stuck. He looked like a man who wouldn't answer straight, or worse, like he already knew what I was going to say. So I shut up, finished my coffee, and got back on the road. For a week I didn't think about it. But the smell followed me. I'd be at the office in Bryan, sitting in the stale hum of fluorescent lights, and suddenly it would hit me. Lilies and the rot of meat gone bad. I'd catch myself gagging into a trash can while my coworkers stared. It came in waves, never when I expected. At night in my apartment, lying in bed with the fan turning overhead, it would drift in through the window like something carried on a breeze that wasn't there. 2 weeks later, I was driving home from a friend's barbecue in College Station when I saw them again. This time they didn't come from behind. They were waiting. Just past a rise in the highway, lined up in the bar ditch, engines running low. A row of 7 hearses with their noses angled toward the asphalt like they were about to merge. I slowed down without meaning to. The lead one pulled out first and the rest followed. Their windows reflected nothing but black, as if they weren't glass at all but holes in the world. I tried to pass them, but every time I pressed the gas, the line seemed to stretch. No matter how far I pushed the speedometer, they slid ahead, the lilies pressing down into the car until I had tears burning my eyes. Then, at a flashing yellow intersection where an old farmhouse leaned against itself, they turned off the road in unison. I slammed the brakes and looked, but there was no side road, just a sagging fence and fields gone to dust. When I drove past, there was nothing on the other side. No dust, no tracks, no sign they'd ever been there. I didn't tell anyone about it until months later. My mother, who grew up near there, just gave me a look that made my chest tighten. She said her grandmother used to warn about that stretch of Highway 6. Said if you ever smelled flowers strong enough to choke you, you ought to pull over, shut your eyes, and wait until it passed. She wouldn't say why. She just shook her head like I'd asked something I wasn't supposed to. After that, I started digging. I found newspaper clippings about wrecks on that road, strange ones. Families driving home from weddings, whole vans wiped out, their bodies never recovered. A Greyhound bus that vanished in the 70s, 23 passengers gone. Nothing left but luggage scattered in a ditch. The stories didn't connect at first. Not until I found the one about the funeral home in Navasota that burned down in 1952. They said the owner, a man named Elmore Stokes, had been embalming bodies in his basement without a license, dozens of them, stacking them up until neighbors complained about the smell. When the fire took the place, the paper claimed the basement was still full of the dead, melted together in ways they didn't want to print. Nobody ever found Stokes's body. The headline read, "Local mortician believed dead," but the way the sheriff phrased it in the article stuck with me. Believed dead, but not confirmed. The third time was the worst. I was alone, heading north near midnight with a thunderstorm behind me, when my headlights caught a reflection on the shoulder. A hearse sat there, hood up, hazard lights flashing. Instinct told me to keep driving, but I slowed. Curiosity or maybe habit. As I passed, I glanced and saw a man standing by the open hood. He wore a black suit that clung wet to his frame, and his skin shone pale as candle wax. His head turned too slow, following me with eyes that weren't eyes but dark, wet sockets. I punched the gas so hard my tires screamed, heart banging against my ribs. In the rear view, I saw the rest of them fall in behind him one by one, headlights off, gliding silent and smooth. The smell hit me so thick I vomited into my lap while the wheel jerked in my hands. I don't remember the next few miles. When I came to, my car was parked on the shoulder near Waller, hazard lights ticking. I don't remember stopping. The road behind me was empty, but the smell lingered, thick as tar. Now I don't drive Highway 6 anymore. I take the long way, even if it adds hours, even if the gas costs more than I can afford. Sometimes, though, even in Houston traffic, I'll catch it. That mix of lilies and rot, faint at first, curling through the vents of my car, and I'll see, in the distance between brake lights, a long, low shape gliding along, its windows black, keeping pace no matter how fast or slow I go. Always ahead, always waiting at the next bend. The highway always looked the same. No matter the time of day, no matter the season. A straight black ribbon that stretched from Houston down through smaller towns that wore their histories in peeling paint and empty storefronts. In the summer, though, the heat turned the road into something alive. It would shimmer and blur in the daylight until it seemed like the whole world had melted into liquid. And sometimes, if you paid attention, you could see the tar blistering like skin under a burn. They said it was just the heat. But there were stories, always stories, that certain stretches of that road would grab hold of your tires and not let go, pulling cars into soft black pits where the asphalt bubbled like boiling water. Some nights people swore they saw faces pressing up through the tar, desperate, twisted faces caught in a silent scream. I had heard about it all my life, but I never believed it. I figured it was just one of those Texas highway legends, meant to keep kids spooked or give bored mechanics something to laugh about over beers. But the summer of 2013, the kind of summer where stepping outside felt like walking into a furnace, I learned the stories were more than just talk. I was driving late, too late, on a 2-lane stretch between Houston and Conroe. I had been working a job that ran long, some wiring in a half-renovated house that wasn't worth the trouble, and by the time I was back on the road, the night had already folded in around me. The heat didn't let up, not even at midnight. It pressed through the truck's vents no matter how high I cranked the AC. I was tired, the kind of tired where every shadow looks like it's moving, and I kept telling myself to just get home. Just another 30 minutes. That was when I saw the first patch of it. At first I thought it was water on the road, one of those slick mirages that linger even after the sun's gone. The headlights caught it in a dull, dark shine, not reflective like water, more like oil. As I drove closer, the truck slowed, the tires humming against a stickiness I couldn't place. My heart gave a little jump and I pressed the gas harder, trying to force through. For a second I thought the tires were caught, like the whole truck had sunk an inch into the blacktop. And then with a lurch it freed itself. The steering wheel shook in my hands, and when I checked the rearview mirror I saw the road behind me ripple, just slightly, before it stilled again. I should have turned around. I should have taken the long way home. But I kept driving, telling myself I was imagining it, that it was just heat damage. Then I started noticing the smell. Not rubber, not tar. Something sharper, like burning meat. I rolled the window down a crack and it only made it worse, thick and sour, like fat sizzling on a pan that had been left too long. The second patch came a few miles later, and this time I slowed down before I hit it. The surface looked wrong, like it was moving, like breath shifting underneath a sheet. I stared too long, and in the shifting dark I thought I saw shapes, pale and blurred, pressing against the black. A forehead, a nose, eyes squeezed shut. I blinked and it was gone, just bubbling tar again. But the smell clawed down my throat until I gagged. My chest tightened. I kept telling myself to keep moving, to just get across before the truck sank, but my foot hesitated on the pedal. The road felt like it was waiting. I eased forward, and again the tires sank a little, held just long enough for my pulse to spike before letting go. That stretch of highway went on like that for miles. Patches of soft blacktop that seemed to pulse under the beams of my headlights, the smell rolling in heavier each time. Once, as I passed a particularly wide patch, I could have sworn I saw a hand push up out of the tar before slipping back under. A pale hand, skin stretched tight, fingers splayed as if clawing for air. My grip locked around the wheel until my knuckles whitened. By the time I reached the last stretch near town, sweat was dripping down my back in thick rivers. I thought I was done with it, that I'd survived whatever that was, when something moved across the road just at the edge of the headlights. I slammed the brakes and the truck shuddered to a stop. In the beam stood a figure. At least I thought it was a figure. It was shaped like a man, but slick and black, as if his whole body had been dipped in tar. He didn't move, didn't stumble away like some drunk, didn't even seem real. Just stood there in the heat shimmer, his head tilted toward me. I sat frozen, my heart beating so hard it hurt. Then he lifted his arm, slow and deliberate, and pointed at me. The tar dripping from his fingers hit the road with a hiss like water on a skillet. I blinked, and in that fraction of a second, he was gone. When I drove again, my tires screamed against the pavement, and I didn't stop until I was pulling into my driveway. The smell followed me home, clinging to the cab, clinging to my clothes. That night, when I tried to sleep, I dreamed of blacktop. I dreamed of lying flat on my back with hot tar creeping up my arms, bubbling around my face, sealing my mouth before I could scream. I woke choking, clawing at my own throat. The next day, I thought maybe I had imagined it. Maybe it was exhaustion and the heat playing tricks. But when I went to check my truck, the tires were streaked black and uneven. Not just dirt, not just wear. Something had melted into the grooves. I touched it and it was warm, even in the morning. Over the years, I've asked around. Some people laugh it off, say the road's just bad, needs resurfacing. But others don't laugh. Others nod slow and say their uncle or cousin saw the same thing. Faces in the road, hands clawing up through the tar. They say the highway was poured over an old burial ground, or maybe a sinkhole where a whole bus went down decades back. Nobody agrees on the story, but they all agree on one thing: don't drive it at night. I still take that road sometimes. Not often, not if I can help it. But every summer when the heat climbs past 100, I hear about it again. Somebody's car gets stuck, axle broken, tires swallowed whole. Somebody swears they saw something moving under the asphalt. And once, a boy from town didn't come home at all. They found his bike abandoned by the roadside, but nothing else, no trace, no body. Just a dark patch of blacktop that looked too soft, too fresh in the relentless sun. And I can't stop thinking about that figure, standing in my headlights pointing straight at me, as if he wasn't done yet, as if the road is still waiting. The two-lane road wound through flat country, black fields stretching on either side, the stalks of dead corn rattling faintly in the warm Texas wind. Clara kept both hands on the wheel, knuckles pale in the glow of the dash. She had been driving since sunset, headed south toward San Antonio after visiting her sister in Waco. By now, it was well past midnight, and the world outside her headlights was just a formless ocean of dark. She kept glancing at the gas gauge, annoyed at how quickly the needle had dropped since the last town. The silence in the car felt oppressive. She had turned the radio off an hour ago after every station blurred into static, no matter how she tuned. Even her phone had no service, the little bars empty in the corner of the screen. It was only her and the road, and the low hum of tires on asphalt. She noticed the first shape by accident, a black hulk slumped on the shoulder up ahead, barely visible until her headlights fell on it. It was an old pickup, maybe a Ford from the 70s, its paint gone to dust, windshield caved in. She thought it must have been sitting there for decades, abandoned and forgotten. But when she glanced at the rear bumper, she swore she saw something wet glisten, like the smear of a fresh handprint. Clara tightened her grip on the wheel and drove on. Another mile, another car. A beat-up station wagon, doors wide open, upholstery shredded. A mile after that, two sedans parked neatly nose to nose as if left by people who had intended to return. All of them old, impossibly old, like relics from a junkyard, yet none had weeds growing up through the wheels. None had nests in the engine blocks. They looked preserved but drained of something essential, like corpses waiting in a line. The night air thickened. She noticed it when she cracked her window to fight the stale smell of her own breath. The outside air reeked of hot metal and stagnant water, and underneath it something sour like meat gone to rot. She shut the window and tried not to breathe too deep. The road narrowed without warning. What had been a respectable stretch of blacktop now pinched to a single lane of patched, uneven asphalt. The trees pressed closer on both sides, their branches twisted like arms. The farther she drove, the older the cars became. Rusted hulks from the 40s and 50s leaned against the tree line, headlights long blind, chrome stripped away. She thought of her father's old stories about wrecks on farm roads, how people went missing on the way home from Friday night football games, how sometimes the sheriff never found more than tire tracks and blood on the gravel. Her chest tightened. She considered turning back, but when she checked the rearview mirror, she saw only darkness. The glow of her taillight seemed swallowed, as if the night had thickened behind her and erased the way she had come. Her phone buzzed in the cup holder, screen lighting up though she knew there was no service. One notification blinked. A text. She picked it up with trembling fingers. The message was blank. No, not blank. She squinted, held it closer. There was an image embedded in the message, faint and gray. A photograph of a road lined with wrecked cars. The angle was from above, like someone had leaned out of a window and snapped a picture. At the bottom corner, barely visible, was her own car. Clara dropped the phone as if it had burned her. It clattered against the floor, screen still glowing faintly. Ahead, the line of cars thickened, tighter now, crowding the shoulders. Their empty windows seemed to stare as she crept past. Some had shattered windshields, the spiderweb glass reflecting her headlights. Some had doors hanging loose, creaking as the night wind pushed them open wider. A few had stains across the hoods that looked black but carried the shape of old handprints, dozens of them. The engine began to stutter. The dashboard lights dimmed. She pressed the accelerator harder, but the car only groaned, the steering wheel jerking slightly as though the road itself wanted her to stop. A sound rose in the distance then, faint at first like the whisper of voices. It came from all around, out of the open windows of the wrecked cars, from the cracked doors and hollow trunks. Murmuring, urgent, impossible to understand, but growing louder as she slowed. The headlights flickered once, twice. Then they died. Clara screamed and slammed the brakes. The car shuddered to a stop. The only light was the faint glow of her phone screen on the floor. The murmurs grew clearer. Not words, but something like breath rising and falling. Dozens of voices gasping in unison. She reached for the keys, twisted them hard. The engine turned once, twice, then nothing. Something moved outside. Not in front of her, not behind, but all around, shifting shapes against the line of cars. Figures stepping out of the open doors, crawling from under the hoods, rising from the slumped seats. Their faces were wrong, stretched too long, mouths slack as if frozen mid-breath. Their eyes were pale and wide, glinting faintly in the dark. They pressed close, their steps soft on the wet pavement. One put its hand against her window, gray fingers splayed wide, nails cracked and long. Another leaned against the windshield, its mouth opening slowly, impossibly wide, the glass fogging with its breath. Her phone buzzed again. Another photo. She forced herself to pick it up, throat tight. The image showed her own car. This time the picture was closer, taken from directly outside her driver's side window. She saw herself staring at the screen, saw the pale shape behind the glass, hand against the door. The timestamp read the current time. The locks clicked open. Clara dropped the phone and reached for the handle, desperate to lock it again, but her fingers wouldn't move fast enough. The door opened with a slow groan, hot night air rushing in, carrying that rot stink. The pale faces leaned in, their mouths opening wider, wider still, until everything was swallowed in darkness. And on the two-lane road, the line of cars stretched farther, each one silent, each one waiting. Another space cleared for the newest arrival. I picked up the buzzards south of San Antonio, somewhere between the Dilly exit and the endless billboards promising clean showers and jerky. They were too many to ignore. At first it looked like tattered trash snagged on the green metal of the signs. Black flags flapping, some prank of the wind. But as my headlights washed over the reflective lettering and the mile markers flicked by, they resolved into birds, huge and hunched, silhouetted against a sky the color of boiled metal. They lined the overpass railings like grim punctuation, placed in tidy ranks along the shoulder-facing side, where they could watch without turning. Their heads swiveled together as I approached, and stayed with me as I passed, not moving a wing, just tracking my car like gun turrets. Even with the windows up and the air conditioning chewing at the heat, I felt their attention. It had a weight to it. I told myself it was August heat madness riding the shimmer off the asphalt, but I kept my hands tight on the wheel and the speedometer a little above the limit, as if speed could scissor me free from those black eyes. I was driving up to Waco from Laredo to collect a box of papers no one had touched in 15 years because my aunt had finally died and the family wanted me to handle the estate. The papers were supposed to be in a storage unit behind a feed store. I had told my boss I needed 3 days and he had looked like he might argue, then remembered what I'd done for him last winter when the pipes burst and said, "Fine, but bring back the company credit card." He never asked why I didn't fly. Flying would have been easy, but flying would have offered me quiet that I couldn't fill with highway radio, and the familiar crawl of concrete miles. I wanted a moving space to think in, which sounds like a lie unless you do it. You get on I-35, set the cruise, and the hours thin. You eat sunflower seeds and drink gas station coffee, and you start to believe that thought is a thing you can carry like an object, turn over, examine, set down again. If I admitted anything to myself, it was that the highway was the only place I trusted my own honesty. I hit Pearsall and the buzzards were waiting on the overhead sign that said, North San Antonio. A dozen of them spaced evenly, heads cocked, eyes like marbles. One of them had a torn wing and it was draped like a cape, ragged at the bottom, making it look like some little lord of death. In the slant of sunset, their bald heads gleamed faintly pink like tips of fingers pressed to glass. A pair of kids in a faded Chevy looked up as they went under the sign and laughed, because they thought it was a trick. The birds did not move. They did not even blink as the Chevy rocketed past, but I saw the heads tilt as the kids came under, then tilt again to catch my car, staying with me until the sign and the birds and that slice of the world were gone in the rear view. It left me with a tight buzzing under my skin. I told myself to stop at the next Buc-ee's, use a clean restroom, buy a brisket sandwich and a gallon of sweet tea to drown the feeling. The first time I saw one move was near Devine, on a little service road where I peeled off to avoid a knot of brake lights. A big bird hopped down from a bent speed limit sign, landed in the gravel with a papery thwack and tilted its head in a slow figure 8, like it was studying me. It didn't flinch when I rolled past. It didn't take off. It lifted one foot and placed it carefully and then settled in the dirt. Its shadow made a flat black coin on the ground. The sun had gone low and the highway air had a burnt sugar smell from spilled diesel, and some roadside field where someone had torched off the weeds. I slowed and the bird made a wet little hiss that sounded too human to be a bird. I kept going. By San Antonio, the night had fallen clean and the traffic was the familiar glittering river. The city usually calms me. The loop and stack interchanges look like bones of some impossible animal, and it feels right to move through them. But the buzzards didn't respect the city line. They were perched on the big green signs that named the exits, on the cylindrical poles that carried cameras, on the skinny shoulders of lampposts, on billboards selling trial lawyers and Christian colleges. Their numbers had multiplied, and now the heads moved in pairs and eights and whole rippling lines as if the birds themselves were a message passing along the highway. Everywhere I went, the message followed. I tried to turn the radio up. I tried a country station, then a preacher, then the Spanish pop I used to listen to at the shop after hours. The voices all sounded flat, as though someone had recorded them in a room with padded walls. The only sound that got through was the tires on pavement and the occasional long hum as I went over a seam. At a Shell outside Shirts, I pulled in because my left calf was cramping and the needle was hunting around a quarter tank. The forecourt was bright enough to make me squint, and I blessed the ordinary stink of gasoline. A boy in a baseball cap was sweeping out the convenience store, and a woman behind the counter was arguing about a scratch-off ticket. I pumped and tried to look like a man on a normal errand. When the pump clicked off, I tipped my head back and felt the joints of my neck pop. Something moved on the sign that advertised diesel prices. I could feel it more than see it. I turned and there were 3 of them in the LED glare, black feathers turning slate in the light, heads pale as bone. They stood side by side like sentries. Behind them on the top rung of the sign, 5 more. The motion I'd felt was the 9 heads rotating in the same slow curve to meet me. My mouth went dry. I told myself to take a picture to prove I wasn't making up some highway superstition. I reached for my phone and it died between my fingers, screen going from the map to a sudden black, as if I had plunged it into deep water. I looked at the pump's little display. The numbers had frozen mid-climb, a row of 7s going nowhere. I looked back at the birds and they were still, and the world around them started again. The pump ticked. My phone vibrated and lit up with a dim App Store prompt that didn't make sense. Inside the store, the air was too cold and smelled like old hot dogs. The boy in the cap was leaning on his broom, staring through the glass, not at the birds but at the glass itself, at his reflection. Like you do when you're trying to see if your face has changed. I got my brisket sandwich and a bottle of water I didn't want. When I got to the counter, the woman looked at me and then past me and then back. She had a small scar like a white fishhook at the corner of her lip. She told me my total and then said it again because I hadn't moved. I asked her if she had noticed the birds. She looked at me like I had told a dirty joke. She said, "Which birds?" I laughed and said the big ones, and she said she hadn't noticed. The boy with the broom said sometimes they hang around when a trucker hits a deer. I said there hadn't been any roadkill. The boy looked at me the way you look at someone who came back from the dead and doesn't yet know they're dead. The woman told me to have a safe night. I walked out into the heat and the birds followed me with their eyes, and I got into my car and I drove. The stretch from New Braunfels to San Marcos is usually a mercy. The wind gets into your hair if you crack the window, and the Guadalupe sometimes breathes cool into the air even at night. Tonight the air felt sealed tight. The black birds multiplied. They weren't just on the signs anymore. They were on the low roofs of warehouse stores, ridge-backed and still. They crouched like gargoyles on the curving shoulders of the high flyover bridges. They ringed the letters on the giant white water tower that says New Braunfels honestly. Every time an exit sign announced a town, they arrayed themselves along it like a row of burned paper, and every head turned when I approached. I missed the San Marcos exit without meaning to. I told myself I should stop, sleep in some motel with the door that opens to the parking lot like they have in Waco near the lake. but I kept going. I didn't want to get out of the car. The car smelled like my life. Junk mail on the floorboard, worn place on the steering wheel where my thumb rests, a salt line on the windshield where last winter's storm had kissed it. Outside was the heat and the birds and something I didn't have words for. Past Kyle, I saw a mother of a wreck on the other side of the freeway. The orange lights from the fire truck made the pecan trees look like stage props. A trooper had his arms folded and his face tipped down. The buzzards sat on the big green sign that announced the next exit and watched. They did not stir at the oil smell, at the glass, at the people who stood in a loose huddle blinking in the lights. They watched the cars go past. Their heads moved together with each approach and pass. I wanted to pull over and walk up the little grassy hill and wave my arms and shout like a man who has had enough of someone's joke. I did not do it. I kept driving. I got to Austin and slid along the upper deck where it always feels like a mistake to be so high going so fast between concrete walls. The city ran under me in streaks of light. A woman on the radio talked about a missing boy and the orbits of planets and how the old gods were never far. I turned it off. The signs in Austin have graffiti and history and weirdness, and tonight they also had birds. 1,000 necks turning in a slow dance as my car arrowed through the center. For maybe 3 seconds, a thought knocked on my skull without coming in. It was a thought about the time before any of this. About a shoulder lip slick with rain and a shape like a gnarled log in the dark, and a decision as quick and permanent as a snapped bone. I told the thought it was mistaken and locked my eyes on the white lane stripes and the little green glow that told me I was north. The road from Georgetown to Temple has always felt unfinished to me. Like they meant to do more and ran out of time. The gas stations squat far apart, and the billboards are fewer and the median is full of tough grass that no mower seems to tame. A pickup rode my tail for a while and then passed me, then slowed without reason, then sped up again and drifted left and right as if the driver were following some sound I couldn't hear. When the pickup finally took an exit, I watched it go up the ramp and pass beneath a sign. The buzzards made their head-turning motion and the pickup didn't come out on the frontage road. It was as if the ramp had swallowed it. I made myself count to 20. On 16, I saw its taillights creep along below, slow as an injury, and I pressed down a breath I didn't need. 2 miles outside Temple, a fog blew up off a little lake I never notice in daytime. It wasn't a fog like a weather thing. It was a gray cloud about 10 feet tall that floated in from the right and crossed the lanes at a walking pace. It was striped with shadows that looked like bars. The birds on the guardrail watched it the way children watch a parade. I turned my brights on and they made a tunnel through the gray. In the tunnel was a picture, the kind you see in your head when you have a fever. It was my old Ford, the one I sold after. It was canted with the 2 right tires in the mud and the left ones on the shoulder. The hazard lights were flashing. There was a sound inside the car like someone typing with fingers made of metal. I slowed because speeding up felt like an invitation to crash into something that was and wasn't there. When I came into the other side of the fog, the road was empty. I could taste metal on my tongue. By Waco, the night had gone rotten. The birds had something to do with that, but not everything. Lake Waco has had bodies in it. Every lake in Texas has. People drown, and sometimes they didn't plan to. Sometimes they did. The air smelled like a wet ashtray and a distant barbecue pit. I took the exit that the lawyer had texted me and came up along a frontage road that ran by a line of RV dealers and a darkened Mexican buffet where 3 cars sat in the lot with their hoods open to the night. The feed store was a cinder block cube with a corrugated awning and a list of hours that didn't make sense. In back were the storage units, gravel lot, and chain link, and a keypad with a plastic flap. Something large had died out there recently. The smell came up in thick waves. The buzzards stood along the chain link in a row and they turned their heads as I got out, and they watched me put in the code from the email, and when the gate shuddered and clanked open, they shifted a little to keep me in the center of their awareness. I had a flashlight I had meant to bring, but it was in the trunk, and I didn't open the trunk because I didn't want to turn my back to them. I used my phone light instead and found Unit 32F and opened it. Inside was 6 boxes and a faint tint of mildew and a lawn chair with one arm broken. The first box had my aunt's handwriting on legal pads that smelled like old lemons. The second had brittle photographs of people with my jawline. I stacked them in the back seat, and when I turned around, the birds had moved. They were on the low roofs of the storage sheds, spaced evenly at the edges as if they were holding the place down with their weight. I shut the unit and smacked the lock back into place and hung the combination on it with hands that were shaking. The chain link gate was halfway closed, though I had not told it to. I walked faster and the birds made their slow collective motion. Something inside me tingled like the moment before a cord burns your hand. I had the thought again about the shoulder and the rain and the log that wasn't a log, and the way the car had shimmied as it passed over, and the noise that had come up through the floor, and the long silent miles afterward where I told myself a story I could live with. I had told myself that by the time I had stopped and turned around, the rain had made it impossible to find the place. That I had driven a half mile and then a mile and then 10, and there had been no break in the guardrail and no marks. And finally I had turned the radio up and talked aloud and said it was a deer. I had told myself that and then sold the car and taken the bus for a year. I had never gone back in daylight. I had never read the news in those counties. I had left it to go quiet. On the chain link, the buzzards watched my mouth shape the old lines. I stepped out onto the frontage road and something had changed. The traffic sound was wrong. The thunder of semis was distant and muffled, like hearing through insulation. The fluorescent bulbs at the RV lot made small humming circles in the dark. The stars had come out and the Big Dipper looked like a drawing on paper that had been folded and smoothed. I climbed into my car and locked the doors and put my head on the wheel for a second. In the second, someone knocked on the passenger window. It was a tiny knock, like a coin. I jerked up and looked. It was a buzzard perched on the side mirror, head cocked. It was close enough to fog the glass with its breath. Its eye was glossy, and when my phone light caught the pupil, it went pin bright. In the reflection, I saw something I had not been willing to see. The seat next to me was not empty. It was soaked black from the shoulder down, and the wetness was not water. It had a slow shine. My hand on the steering wheel had smears I did not recognize as my own. The buzzard drew its beak across the glass with a sound like a match being struck. I flinched and the world came in with a rush, tires, air, night. I put the car in drive and jerked forward, and the bird rode the mirror for a second, balancing as if it had spent its whole life on cars. On the way back to the interstate, they were worse. They were a moving punctuation to every decision I made, a living syntax I could not ignore. If I signaled right, a row of heads tilted right. If I pressed the horn, the line on the overpass bent outward as if it were wind. If I slowed, they leaned in to observe the slowing. The road onto the interstate was one of those long curling ramps that feels like climbing into a snake, and they lined its outer edge. I drove with both hands and held my breath. At the top, a truck had lost a tire, and the shredded rubber lay in the lane like someone's discarded ribcage. I swerved and cleared it, and the car settled, and I told myself that getting on the interstate again would put me back into the thick flow of normal life. I merged, and for a blessed minute I was in the stream, all of us humming toward overnight destinations. It was maybe 5 miles north that the buzzing under my skin became a voice. I don't mean a supernatural voice. I mean the one that teaches you to tell the truth when no one is watching, because you cannot stand the sound of yourself lying. The voice said you will not get home. The voice said you have already come as far as you can on the story you told yourself. The voice said, with the patience of an old teacher, that the birds had always been there and I had finally become the kind of person who could not look away. The voice is cruel and it is kind. I took the next exit with a sign that said Hillsboro and a smaller sign that said Lake Whitney. The birds on the big sign tilted their heads in unison. I went down the ramp and the frontage road was empty. There is a place where you can pull over and look out toward the dark water. I did it without planning. The headlights cut across a concrete barrier. On the other side, 20 feet down, a ditch pooled with black water. The banks were tracked with mud-slick marks where cars have slid and been winched. The bird stood along the barrier and watched me watch the ditch. I knew what I was going to do then. I killed the headlights and the world went velvety and wide. In the sudden dark, the birds didn't vanish. They became a row of small pale faces floating above their bodies, like coins laid on the eyes of the dead. I got out and walked to the barrier. The cicadas were loud. The smell was green and rotten and metallic. I climbed onto the concrete and leaned out and pictured how rain would feel on the wheel, and how easy it would be to say you never saw the shape. I pictured a face tilted up, a hand lifted, a mouth open for a name to fit in it. My stomach folded in on itself. I made a little noise. It might have been no. The birds didn't caw or hiss. They only watched. The ditch below had a darker patch that could have been anything. My phone vibrated. The screen showed a number I didn't know. I answered because there was nothing else left to do. The voice on the line was flat and tired and could have been anyone. It said they had found a body today off a frontage road near Temple. It said the body had been in water a long time and the person had been young, and there was a bracelet with a name that someone in a different city had finally reported missing. It said sometimes families do not know who to call. It said the police thought the cause of death had been blunt force trauma and exposure. The voice said, because it had to say something and because I had answered that if I had seen anything on the highway I could call back. I said I hadn't. The voice thanked me. The phone hung up without anyone pushing a button. The buzzards did not move. A breeze came up from the lake and tasted like pennies. I climbed down from the barrier. I walked to the car as if it belonged to someone else, and I got in and I started the engine. I drove back toward the highway entrance. The birds paced me along the fence line until the fence ended. On the on-ramp, I paused and rolled down the window. The night inhaled. I looked at my hands on the wheel. They were clean again. No smears, no shine. In the side mirror, I saw a long line of black shapes clipped to the silhouette of the barrier. All the heads pivoted at once. They had done it for me 100 times that night. They would do it for whomever came next. Their patience was not human and it was not animal. It was the patience of landscape. The freeway's noise came up like surf. I understood as clearly as I have ever understood anything that I could not get away from them by driving. No matter which direction I took, the signs would climb out of the darkness ahead like teeth and the birds would be on them. And when I passed, they would follow me with their heads until I was out of sight. I went north because north was what my life had taught my hand to do. Past west with its kolaches, past the rest areas where families sleep in minivans with the engine running, past the little roadside crosses with plastic flowers gone chalky from the sun. I watched the birds adjust and follow and adjust and follow. An unending call and response that drew a dotted line through my chest. Somewhere before Waxahachie, I made a decision, and it hardened like a tooth. I signaled and moved left and kept moving left until the concrete barrier was a gray stripe, and the headlights of oncoming cars bloomed and narrowed. I felt calm the way cold water feels honest. I drove into the space between two 18-wheelers where there is no space. I did not hit my brakes. The scream of metal was quick and close, and then there was a whip of time, and I was a toy in a box that had been kicked by a child. When I woke, the car was upside down. Glass lay against the roof like a frozen rain. The world beyond the cracked windshield had been reduced to the bottom halves of things. Grass roots, the underside of a sign, the slick belly of the sky. The buzzing in my nerves had gone quiet for the first time since Pearsall. It was replaced by a long, warm awareness of parts of me I would no longer need. The seatbelt held without hurting. A ribbon of smoke climbed toward the floor. In the white light that comes when pain steps out of your way, I saw the big green sign above the lanes. It said Dallas in numbers and letters and arrows. The birds were there. They had claimed every letter from the D to the S. Their heads tilted together in a slow, precise motion, and at last I understood it. The rhythm and the reason. They weren't following me. They were reading me. They had been reading me since the first mile. They kept reading until I stopped being a sentence and became a period. They tilted and tilted and tilted, and then, as the warmth spread and the voices of the drivers swelled and someone shouted, as a hand slapped the glass like a friendly dog, they launched. The black wings beat the heat and the moon, the bodies lifting in stately order from left to right, and they streamed out over the lanes in a long rope that sagged and rose, going where the road went, marking the next story in the next car with the next driver, who believes the highway is a place where you can think without consequence. I drove nights for a living, which means I learned all the ways a highway speaks. In daylight, Route 180 between Weatherford and Mineral Wells looks like any other two-lane ribbon the state forgot to widen, with mesquite leaning in and the odd rusted-out tractor sulking in a pasture. At night, the asphalt hum changes and the creosote posts groan, and every dip in the road feels like the mouth of a thing considering a bite. People called me when they hit armadillos, when they missed the deer but kissed the drainage ditch, when the radiator went and the red pin slammed the right side of the gauge like a kid at a county fair. I hauled drunks home and college kids with sunburn peeling from a day at Possum Kingdom, and once a woman who had tied a pink ribbon to her antenna because she believed God watched for color. I told myself I liked the quiet, but if I'm honest, I liked the illusion that I was the only one awake for 100 miles. You can be a king on a night road if you accept the crown of fluorescent bulbs and the smell of antifreeze in your clothes. The first time I saw the barn, I was 15, in the back of my father's Ford. Head leaned against a warm window after a day of working fence on my uncle's land. It was summer. The heat had not so much left as stepped aside to watch us survive it. My father slowed because a patrol car had someone pulled over near a pasture gate, and that's when I looked past the bar ditch and saw the red. Not a fresh tomato red, not the candy apple paint of a new truck, but the scabbed color of something that had bled and healed badly. Boards that had seen 3 generations of nails, a caved roofline like a broken knuckle. The moon was thin and the only light was from oncoming headlights, a white wash across the slats. When the light turned the boards from black to gray, my brain made a leap it should not have made and told me those gray slivers were faces. They had cheeks and eyes and teeth in the spaces where 2 weathered planks almost met, pressed forward as if the barn were a skin stretched too tight over a crowd. I remember thinking they were laughing. Then the lights passed and there was only wood again. I asked my father if he'd seen it. He said, "Seen what?" I said, "The faces." He made a little sound in his nose like he did when he decided not to comment on something, and he turned on the radio. 3 songs later, he said, "Don't go messing around in old buildings along the highway. They're how boys get tetanus and snakes get fed. You can file that in your mind as a boy's scare if you like." I did. For 20 years I drove that stretch and pretended I didn't swing my eyes away from that pasture. But bad places want you to know they remember you. On a Tuesday in late September, when the last of summer was being peeled from the mesquite by a north wind that couldn't make up its mind, I got a call from dispatch about a stalled sedan near mile marker 326. Just west of a place where the land heaves up a little and the road tries to climb it without much success. That marker sits a few hundred yards from the red barn, though the marker wasn't there when I was 15. The woman on the phone said the driver sounded scared. A slow leak and a dead battery, she said, like the car decided to die twice. I took the long bed out, the one with the good winch, because I had a feeling I would need to drag more than sheet metal. When I turned off the county road and back onto 180, the wind brought me the smell of alfalfa gone musty and the faint tang of something older, like a burned clutch or a barn swallow nest wet with rain. I spotted the hazard flashers before I saw the car, amber coins tossed against the night. Her sedan sat half on the shoulder, half in the grass, as if it had panicked and tried to flee the asphalt. A woman in a denim jacket stood behind it with her arms folded tight, not for warmth but to keep her hands from shaking. She had dark hair pulled back in a way that meant she'd been working and wanted it out of her face. When my beams washed over her, she flinched and then exhaled, like she'd been holding her breath not to be seen. I parked nose to nose with her car so we could use my lights to see what we were doing. She gave me a name that I don't feel brave enough to write because sometimes names act like crowbars and pry things open. She said she was driving in from Abilene to see a sister in Fort Worth. The text chain on her phone full of "We'll be there by 10, very soon, almost there." I told her she'd picked the right stretch to break down because I knew it like my own house. She said she'd tried to call the sheriff, but the call dropped twice. I told her dispatch routes through a tower in Mineral Wells that sulks in the rain and pretends it doesn't serve us. She laughed in that automatic way strangers laugh when they want an authority nearby to keep being an authority. We popped the hood. The battery leads were clean but loose enough to turn with fingers, a thing that makes a man suspicious because murderers and saboteurs tighten their bolts and the wind doesn't loosen a nut evenly on both poles. Her radiator hose looked fine. The tire on the driver's side had been riding a slow death for so long, the sidewall was furred with dust. I said we'd do the battery first. She said fine, but can we please finish before those faces come back? I didn't answer her for a count of 3 because my mouth had gone dry. I asked what faces. She looked up, past me, toward the dark where my high beams reached and then ended a few yards shy of the fence. Her pupils were saucers in the light. She said when she'd pulled over she saw a barn, and it looked empty like a movie set, the kind where no one builds the back wall. She walked toward it because her daddy once told her old barns were where you find kittens. She took 3 steps into the grass and then a truck came by and its lights ran along the boards. She said there were faces at the slats, pressed into the cracks like weeds looking for a seam. She said they grinned so hard their gums showed. I told her people saw things after wrecks because of adrenaline. She said she hadn't wrecked. I said, the body thinks you have. I tightened the posts, checked the ground strap, jump-started the battery. When the engine caught, I said, Keep it running while I change that tire." She said, "Yes, please." I jacked the car and spun off lug nuts, and I watched the grass beyond the ditch as much as I watched the steel, because sometimes you want to keep your eye on nothing. 2 ranch trucks roared by like indifference. The third was a lifted F-250 that probably belonged to a boy who spent more on exhaust pipes than groceries. And he flashed his brights twice while he approached, because boys like to signal they were once taught courtesy by an older man. The sweep of his light went hard across the pasture like a hand punishing a table. The red barn went from silhouette to a mouthful of gray teeth. Faces bloomed in the spaces and shoved forward, and they were grinning. Yes, but the pull of those mouths had gone past joy into a rictus, an exertion, as if they were holding the grin the way a weightlifter holds a barbell. The eyes were wrong because they were not centered on us so much as trained beyond us, toward something behind, as if whatever pushed them forward had its palms between their shoulder blades. The F-250's lights moved past, and the gray slats were wood again. My chest had filled with something like acid, and it took me a second to remember how to breathe. The woman saw my face and nodded as if we had agreed to never speak out loud about this. I finished the tire with hands that felt a beat slower than my brain. I told her I would follow her to Weatherford and we could swing into the Shell just east of the square for coffee, so I'd be sure she made it. She said, "Please." When she put the sedan in drive, it stalled. She turned the key. The engine said, "Not now." I told her to give it a minute and try again. The road behind us went briefly black like a stage before a cue. Then I heard them. I have lived long in a state where coyotes call from the hedgerow and cows bellow for the calves taken for weaning, and the wind does its own talk if it finds a loose tin roof to flutter. I know what animals sound like when they approach. This wasn't that. It was the noise of wooden things adjusting to a weight. It was nails reconsidering their life choices. It was the tick and creak of a structure that had been still for years, and now was bearing up under feet on its floor. I turned and saw the silhouette of the barn shift. Not forward, not closer, but as if the night had reached 2 fingers into the middle of it and pulled slightly. You shouldn't be able to perceive distance changes like that in the dark unless the shape has its own light inside. I told her to get into my truck. She asked if we should lock her car. I said later. She did what scared people sometimes do, which is argue politely with their rescuer. But thank God in the end she climbed into the passenger seat. I got behind the wheel, did not look at the barn, and put the truck into drive. When we pulled onto the asphalt, something came from between the fence posts and hit the side of the bed with enough force to jounce us. Not a body. If a body had hit us, we would have heard it fall back onto the road and scrape, or we would have seen it tumble in my side mirror. This was like hitting a wooden gate that isn't there. We drove to Weatherford without talking. At the Shell, under the honest fluorescence and the camera dome and the row of windshield squeegees in their frigid baths, she cried into her coffee and said she had seen her mother's face, except her mother had been buried 2 summers before in a cemetery outside Cisco, with the grass gone yellow around the edges of the stone. I said I had seen my father's and my father was still alive. I didn't tell her my father had the kind of grin that showed deep canine teeth, a grin I inherited and learned to hide in photographs because people don't like a man who looks like he eats what scares him. She asked if the faces were real. I said, "There are things that are real and there are things that become real if you look at them long enough." She asked me why the barn would grin. I told her when I was 12 I went gigging with my father in a shallow lake west of town, where the cypress knees come up like knuckles, and the water is tea, and the base hide under the pads. We stuck a gar through the side and brought him up behind the boat, and he had a grin like a boy who had learned to lie. Some mouths are naturally cruel, even when they have nothing to do with intention. She said she didn't like the idea that a building could have a mouth. I said maybe the building had a stomach and that was worse. She called her sister. The voice on the other end sounded grateful and far away. I watched the glass door of the gas station while a man at pump 6 did the thing where he stares at his phone and forgets to remove the nozzle. I told myself that the front of the barn had some of its siding broken in a way that looked like faces if you shone light across them. Then I told myself you don't hear boards complain when the light hits in the right angle. The next afternoon I drove back in daylight. It was a dirty sun with enough haze to make everything look a little jaundiced. The barn stood in its pasture, a bulwark of rot and red paint that had flaked so badly the color seemed less painted, and more like the wood had received a long, thin rash. In daylight it was a social studies photograph of pioneer times. You could point to it and say, "This was where people worked and no one would question you." I parked across the road and climbed the fence because sometimes a man needs to prove his eyes the night before had been excited liars. Old nails stuck out like whiskers, and a corner of the roof had collapsed to show a spill of hay that had long since turned to something like the hair in a shower drain. The door hung on one hinge and moved a little in the wind, not to open but to be vain about the fact it could. Inside were the ordinary artifacts of a place that used to care for animals. A shovel with the wood gone soft at the handle. A rusted tin of feed so foolishly sharp at the torn edge it told you outright it wanted a piece of your hand. A rope tied to a beam in a single loop like somebody's memory of how a knot should work. Enough light fell through the boards to make stripes on the mass of old straw that smelled like dried tea. That should have settled me. It didn't. There was a part of me that had slept badly as a boy and sat up in bed to watch the mostly closed door of my room and imagine what kind of hand would move it the rest of the way. That part cleared its throat and told me to walk the perimeter. Outside, along the back wall, the foundation stones were sunk at a slant the way things lean when the ground beneath them has decided to travel in a different direction at a different speed than the surface. A garden of prickly pear had grown under the eaves like a congregation of ears. On the north side, in the shade where the boards held a little sweat just above ground level, somebody had hammered 2 rows of 12 nails into a post. Each nail held a length of old ribbon, sun-bleached to the color of fingernails tied in a loop. I pulled one and it came away with a sigh, like the air behind the board was grateful to be unstoppered for a second. The loop was the size of a child's wrist. That night I went to the Dairy Mart in Weatherford and asked old man Blaylock, who held court there since he'd retired from owning a feed store, if he knew who owned the pasture. He told me a name that had been around since before Palo Pinto County had a courthouse worth burning. He said the boy had run off in the 80s and let the land go ragged. I asked if there'd been trouble. He said there's always trouble, but sometimes it's just quieter. Then he told me his father used to say that barn had a mouth. When Blaylock was a child, his father had lost a cousin in that pasture, a boy who limped because of a birth thing and who liked to climb fence posts to pretend he was taller. They found that boy's hat and one shoe by the ditch and nothing else for 2 days. The third day the boy walked out of the barn with a grin too, big for his teeth, and went to the kitchen and drank 3 glasses of well water and then fell over on the linoleum with his heart beating so hard it moved his shirt. The doctor said heat stroke, then looked at the boy's gums and changed his mind and wrote down snakebite. Blaylock's father said he had never seen gums pulled so far from teeth without cotton and pliers involved. I said that sounded like an old man's story. Blaylock said all stories get old if you leave them alone long enough. It's a wicked thing, curiosity. It wants you to go back where you heard your own heart run fast so you can congratulate yourself for being brave next time. I took my truck out on Thursday, and I parked on the shoulder with my nose aimed at the open mouth of that pasture, and I sat a long time, with the engine off and the radio quiet and the red of the barn, soaking up moonlight like it had waited all week to be noticed by me. I told myself I would give it exactly 1 sweep. Trucks slowed when they saw a work rig angled like that, because nobody wants to be the one who gets tagged in a ticket around a blind rise. In a lull between a pair of pickups and a cattle hauler that coated the air with a fog of manure, I flicked my headlamps on, and then to brights, and I counted 1, 2, 3 across the boards. Faces arrived as if somebody had slid a tray under a door and then pushed it the rest of the way with their foot. Their teeth looked flat like a black and white photograph of someone laughing in a yearbook. Their eyes weren't quite where they should be on a human face because you don't get to line up perfectly in a crack you don't choose. A boy's forehead rode too high. A woman's left eye looked like it had slipped toward the temple because of the way the slats bucked in the heat. Among them, near a knot where the grain had made a little whirlpool, I saw my father's mouth. I saw the thing he did with his jaw when the dentist told him he needed a crown and he said, "Grind it down and don't tell me about it." I saw the front tooth that had a chip from when he went to Deep Ellum in his youth and took a bottle over the lip. I turned the lights off. The faces went to wood I should have driven away. I should have gone home to my 1 bedroom where I keep 3 coffee mugs and a jar of nails and a calendar that always tells me last month's days. Instead, I took the mag light from behind the seat and I crossed the ditch and I walked through grass that reached my thighs. When the beam of a flashlight hits a barn's boards, the light doesn't wash the way headlights do, but knifes into the cracks. It made little shards of white that made me think of teeth again, and I hated myself for that cliché. And I moved the beam right to left and nothing moved inside. My shadow fell onto the wood and looked like a coat hung where no hook had been. I told myself ghosts are cowards in the face of specificity, so I spoke aloud. I said, "If you're there, say my name." That is the kind of sentence a man speaks when he wants to believe in the limits of the universe, and do it with a referee in the room. The wind moved in the grass behind me in a way that was not a sentence but was a kind of address. I put my palm on the wood. It was warmer than it had any right to be, and it trembled. Not with wind because the wind had died, but with a long, thin shiver as if something inside breathed. I don't know how long I stood there trying to decide if the tremble came from tendon or rope. A horn sounded on the highway and the beam of a car licked across the boards at an angle. My hand felt a press back. Not a hand, a cheek. I pulled away and fell into the prickly pear because men always earn certain kinds of pain when they move backward in the dark. I lay there among the spines and the red of the barn swam in my eyes like a warning my body had sent me and I had ignored. When I got my knees under me and stood again, my jeans were stippled with blood and my pride had taken a gouge. The door of the barn had moved 2 inches further open. Not in the wind. With intent. It hung so loose that the only way it could have shifted like that was if someone had laid 2 fingers to it from the inside and moved those fingers to make a point. I went home. I locked my door in 3 places and I put the mag light on the counter, and I put the ribbon I had taken from the nail beside it. Because I hadn't realized my hand had pocketed it until then, and I stared at the loop and I thought about wrists. The ribbon smelled like old cedar and something else, something salt. I slept for an hour and dreamed of mouths not attached to faces. When I woke, my house felt like a place I used to live. The woman from the breakdown texted me. I had given her my number because people like to repay rescues with desserts or gratitude. She asked if I had told anyone. I said no. She said her sister's baby had woken twice in the night and laughed in a way that had made the hair at the back of her neck stand up. I told her babies laugh at ceilings because that's where they put their angels. She did not answer. I put my phone down on the ribbon. My phone buzzed. The ribbon moved. Vibrations move light things, you can tell yourself that. The knot turned just enough that the loop looked like an O that wanted to speak. On Friday, I went to see my father. He lives outside Millsap in a house his hands built while mine were getting good at changing serpentine belts. He let me in and poured coffee and said, "You look whipped." I told him I had a question about a barn. He said, "There are many." I described the red one. He looked over my shoulder at a point on the wall where his dog, dead 10 years now, used to stare when storms rolled in. He said, "My father took me there when I was a little younger than you were when you saw it." He said it had been a place for threshing when the road was still a wagon-rutted thing that could drown in spring. He said we made the mistake of shining the truck lights on it. He said he saw his own father, the man who had died 2 springs before, grinning back at him with a mouthful of wood. He said we don't go back because sometimes a place wants you to be the one who goes back. Then he told me in a voice that comes out of a man only once or twice in his life, that his sister had gone missing the winter after that. People said she ran off with a boy who could promise her nothing but took her to Waco anyway. He said I think sometimes she stopped halfway to the fence. I asked him what he meant. He said, "When a thing presses you forward, you don't always reach the distance you thought you would." I went back that night because some men never learn what to leave alone. The moon had gone down early and the sky had the taste of rain in it, even though the weatherman would swear on his tie we wouldn't see a drop for a week. I parked with my truck's nose off the road and I turned off my engine. And I watched the barn until my eyes adjusted to the dark like a cat's might. The pasture had the polite sound of crickets and the rude sound of one bullfrog in the bar ditch. I held the ribbon and the ribbon felt like the wrist of something that did not fight me, because it had no pulse to argue with. A car came from the west and I could tell by the speed and the sound it was someone who knew this road, not someone just passing through. Their light skimmed the barn like a stone thrown across water. Faces rose. Among them, near the place where I had felt a cheek, there was a mouth I had kissed before I left for nights and overtime. My wife had been dead for 3 years because a hospital pharmacy in Fort Worth had mislabeled a pill bottle, and the world is careless when we most need it not to be. The mouth she had used to say my name with a voice that loved me opened in the slats and the grin was not hers. The teeth were hers. I knew the vein in the lower lip that made a tiny swelling no one else would notice, but the grin was not. I stood and I walked into the field and I didn't feel the grass or the spines or the dark because my body had decided to return to its hunger. I reached the boards and the boards breathed. The door moved a fraction more. You should expect me to come to my senses then. People in stories do. They see the trap at the last minute and leap back, and the trap closes on air and the air screams. I didn't move. Something on the other side of the wood pressed its forehead against the gap, and the wood pressed the shape of it into my skin with the mild insistence of a mother's hand pushing hair away from a boy's face. I put my mouth to the crack and I said the name I don't write. The wood warmed. The grin widened until I thought gums would tear. Then the door gave up, pretending to be attached, and fell inward with a dull, noble sound like a fat book closing. The dark inside was not the dark outside. And if you have ever been underground, you know there are shades of dark that insist on their pedigree. This one came from dirt. It rose in the doorway like steam. I don't know what happened next in the way a man knows the steps he takes from a porch to a mailbox. There are pieces. The feeling of my feet on a floor that had alternated hooves and rain for 100 seasons. The sound a child makes when you rub a thumb over a forearm with a mosquito bite on it to soothe the itch. Except large and from a wood beam as something heavy ran along it. The ribbon in my fist pulling a little, not like it was stuck, but like it had become part of a long line of slack that went somewhere I did not want to imagine. I followed it because that is what we do with lines that promise us the end of a question. There were prints in the dust of the floor, the kind you could interpret a number of ways if you didn't want to admit they were feet. Some deep, some shallow, all pointing inward toward a place in the corner where the hay made a small hill, as if the hay were a thing that felt shame and wanted to hide itself. I stepped wrong into a divot and my ankle gave that sharp jerk that tells you you'll limp tomorrow, and I grabbed for the post with the nails to steady myself, and the nails sang. It was an honest sound, a ring that came up through the wood and through my arm and into my mouth, and it made my teeth itch and I bit my tongue and I tasted iron. The sound went out into the room, and the room replied with a lift, just a quarter inch like a dog whose name has been called in a room where it didn't expect the voice. I don't want to pretend bravery. I don't want to tell you I stood there and measured the options like a chess player. I did what a man does when a room breathes around him with the smell of a thing he loved once and can't have back. I said, please. The hay slid in a way that made a small avalanche sound, and something underneath it stood. Not a person, not a woman with the mouth I remembered, but the negative space her body might have made if all the light in the room were instructed to go around her. It leaned into the band of my flashlight and the beam broke on it the way water breaks on a rock. Not onto, around. It moved toward me without walking. The way a curtain moves and you don't see who is behind it yet. The faces in the boards pressed out again where my beam wandered, and they grinned a little. The kind of little that is worse than a lot. The thing in the hay reached the post the nails were driven into, and I realized with a small clean horror that the ribbons had once held hands. There were wrists that had learned this loop and had lost and had forgotten they were wrists. Something touched my shoulder from behind. It was fingers through a crack. They pressed as if they wanted to push me forward into a hug I did not want. I turned and put my palm to the wood again, and the cheek pressed back and was warm and hard like a man's cheek. When he's clenched his jaw so long the muscle is no longer soft. I said, Father. The cheek relaxed like a man who hears his name after hours of being called the wrong one. The floorboards shifted under my boot soles. I thought of the highway. I thought of how light is a permission and how maybe we had all been granting this place too much permission with our beams and our stairs and our secret need to be seen by it. I backed out into the doorway because the dark behind the faces had started to feel like pressure, and I got as far as the threshold. And something took the ribbon from my hand, not a yank, but a lift, and it slid like a fish and disappeared into the seam between two boards as if the wood had learned to eat. The loop left a burn on my palm that lasted 2 days. I walked out backward into the night because I didn't want to turn my back on the idea of faces. I reached the ditch and the gravel gave under my heel, and I went down, and the smell of the sewage trickle there hit me like a hard truth. When I stood and looked back, the door hung at a new angle that told me it had a way of closing that didn't need hinges. On Saturday, there was a wreck a mile east. A boy in a Dodge who had texted a girl and told her he was coming in hot. They cut him out with saws and there was nothing anyone could do. I drove past after the troopers were done, and the girl who waited at the side of the road cried into a towel. I saw in the corner of my eye the red square of the barn, and I did not look because I didn't want to see his grin. By Sunday, people were posting on local pages about the old place again. Someone had taken a picture at twilight, and the resolution was bad in a way that makes people think they see more than the camera did. They circled blurry flecks and wrote the names of their dead beside them as if balancing a checkbook. The woman I'd helped sent me another text. She said her sister had put the baby down for a nap, and the monitor showed a face in the bars of the crib. She said they threw the monitor away. I told her monitors can pick up radio. She said radio doesn't smile. I did not reply. There is a limit to what comfort you can throw at a fire and expect it to live. I kept driving nights. You can't quit your life because a building learned an expression. I changed tires and winched cars out of the mud left by storms the forecasters said wouldn't come. I carried in the back of my truck a length of ribbon that I cut from a new spool at the hardware store. Not sun-bleached yet, stubborn in its dye. Sometimes a man needs a talisman even if he knows the talisman is a loop around his own wrist. On a Monday, an old sheriff's deputy with gums as pale as the inside of a shell approached me at the Shell and said, "You been out by that red place?" I said, "I pass it like anyone." He said, "Don't pass it too much." He smiled a little and a piece of tobacco showed where his teeth had argued with years and lost. He said a rumor in his day, told to him by a man who sat on a porch cleaning a 22 while the sun did its best at setting, was that the barn never had a threshing machine, never had a team tied to its posts, never had a man spit into a spittoon in its shade. The rumor was that it was built empty, a box with a mouth aimed at the road, and the man who built it kept no animals but the ones who stopped to see. He said, "I think rumors are just stories with the varnish worn off." Then he nodded in a way that suggested he had decided I was part of the rumor now. Maybe that is all this is, a thing that sits where it can be seen and asks to be seen, a thing that feeds on the permission of our beams and our willingness to turn strangers into witnesses. Maybe it has no hunger of its own. Maybe we bring it dinner. I can tell you the last time I went there because I have not been back since, and I like to honor vows even if I made them to a field. It was a week later, near midnight, thin mist rising from low spots like the breath of the asleep. I parked too close because sometimes when you know a thing will swallow you, you choose to press yourself against its tooth to feel the edge. I walked in with my hands empty. I did not bring the ribbon. I did not bring the light. I stood in front of the boards and I waited until my eyes did that trick where they make more out of less. A car came from the east and its lights went over the boards and the faces pushed forward like they had been holding their breath. I saw my wife. I saw the boy from the Dodge. I saw my father, except he was still alive and probably snoring in Millsap with his jaw clenched. I saw a small face in a place too low on the wall for any grown person to fit, and it smiled with a mouth that didn't yet have all its teeth. Then my own face pressed out near the knot where the grain whirls. It looked wrong because we never see our own faces without glass in between to lie for us. My mouth had too much of my father's dog in it. My eyes looked past me toward the darkness inside. It grinned. I did not feel my mouth move, but I felt my gums tighten as if they were being asked to make a choice about how much of my teeth to show. I took a breath and the faces leaned a fraction as if breath were a cue. There is a particular kind of shame in realizing you have come to a place to be chosen by it. I thought of all the cars I had helped and all the doors I had opened for strangers. I thought of how the night road makes kings of men who have no right to crowns. I thought, if I step inside, who will I call to bring me back? Then something behind the boards, large and patient, moved its hands. You don't see hands in a place like that. You feel their direction. It lifted as if prying up a lid. The door, without hinges to obey, raised a little and light from the highway slid under it, a band across the floor. In that band I saw marks. Little O-shaped stains evenly spaced, darker than the wood they sat on. Like loops had lived there and sweated, and the sweat had the color of salt and grief. It was a tidy line, the kind a man makes when he wants to organize his wrongs. I took one step backward and then another. The faces watched. They did not fall back into wood. They stayed forward, eager, like children watching a magician waiting for the flourish. I reached the ditch. I stepped down. Water took my boot with a hungry sucking sound. Behind me, the door floated down like a tired eyelid. The grins did not go away. They remained in the cracks as if they had become the cracks. I got into my truck and started it and pointed it east, and I drove to a place where the highway widens and you can tell yourself, the land expects you to pass through without being weighed and found wanting. In my mirror, the red square remained visible longer than it should have. I have not driven night since. People call the dispatch and say he used to be the one, and the new boys go and pretend they are kings. I take day jobs, hauling, fixing, cutting old wire off fence posts. I do not take the long cut along 180, not even to save time. Sometimes at noon I will think I hear a board creak in that no-wind way, and I will look up and whatever wall is near me will pretend it has always been a wall. After storms, I find ribbons in places no wind should have deposited them, loops the size of a wrist, sun bleached to a pale that reminds me of the inside of a shell. I throw them away. I have learned not to touch wood that shivers, but there are nights even now when a horn sounds far off and the air brings me that faint tang of old straw and hot boards and something like salt. When a friend calls to say traffic is stalled on 180 because people have started pulling off to take pictures. When a woman messages me to ask if I know whether you can see it better from the eastbound lane or westbound. On those nights I turn on all the lights in my little house and make coffee I do not drink, and remind myself the door of my bedroom is just a door. I remember standing in front of that wall and watching my own mouth and another mouth grin until the skin around my gums hurt. I remember the press of a cheek to my palm that knew me without liking me. I count the number of nails in the studs. I tell myself there are no faces in wood unless someone begs them to come. Then, when the quiet is too large, I go to the window and I look east and I see the low glow the highway throws into the sky over Weatherford, and I tell myself that in that glow, there is a pasture that has decided to stay hungry as long as people aim their headlights at it. I whisper directions to nowhere in particular. I touch my mouth to see if it is smiling. I make sure my teeth are covered, and I do not drive.